Blooming Black, Part 3 by Juliann Whicker. Chapter 26. The fireball was pink, to match my dress, I assumed. I swept it around me in a swirl of pink flame that reminded me of my fox shrug. It was probably still on the floor of the limo. I threw the flame ball back at her before I pulled out my first herder. She caught it, and immediately a cloud of pink smoke swirled around her, mixing with the pink fire. It was quite pretty. After she'd wrapped the flames and the explosives inside a net of sparkling silver magic, she studied me, her expression blank. "You love him." I clenched my jaw. "It's not a problem. You belong to him. You didn't even bother to cover up your shoulder." I shrugged. "Maybe if you'd warned me about binding myself to someone." She smiled and took a step towards me, red flame flickering at the ends of her hands. "You think that a warning would help you. I warn you, tourney fighting, keeping live pets, jumping off houses, but you are rebellious and foolish, a daughter after my own heart. You wouldn't allow a man to carve his name into your skin if you weren't already lost." She lunged forward, palms flat, as she sent a long wave of red fire at me. I screamed as I swirled the fire around me. I wanted to feel the burning, the aching agony, so I would stop hurting from Drake's refusal. I knew better, she was right, but that would never stop me from doing what was in my nature. My nature was to fall, to end up loving a man who would ruin me as my mother had been ruined, like Poppy. I spun the fire around me for too long. I barely had time to send it into the floor before it consumed me. Red flames still flickered on my skin, agony that cleared my head. I stared at her and felt almost calm. This was my life, not hers. It's not a problem. I still have time. There are others at school I can use. How did you find Revere? How did you secure him? She frowned, and the flames at the ends of her fingers flickered out. I knew Revere before. She had a look of emotion that I didn't want to see. Her voice was soft, difficult to make out. Blackheart. We met. We were together. We talked and laughed. She swallowed and closed her eyes, clasping her hands in front of her. I met your father. His scent consumed everything. I knew this part. My hands started shaking. I was lost in him. Such madness. I still feel his teeth on my throat. She opened her eyes wide and rubbed her neck with her fingers. You broke the thrall, little Penny. My body was filled with life, and I remembered myself, remembered Revere, and escaped. This was not the right story. He'd abandoned her when he saw that she would not give me up. He held you in thrall? Her eyes became focused, and her voice hardened. Love is thrall. He enslaved me, ruined me. I almost allowed you to be destroyed. When I refused, he left me with nothing. I gave my life for you. That is the curse of motherhood. Losing oneself. But you said that you remembered yourself when you had me. She raised an eyebrow. Eventually. Without you, I wouldn't have had focus, purpose, something to get me through the moments that dragged on for years until Revere found me and made us his home. You love Revere. She frowned sternly and threw a spear of fire at my head. I ducked and threw a herder back at her. She caught it, and for a moment we stared at each other until a pink dragon wrapped itself around her, spewing fumes and chemicals that would burn her and poison her skin. She closed her eyes, and then I heard her whisper. I know that I love because I do not own. You can't love something you keep in chains. Tell me about desire, about binding. Where does it come from? Why does it consume everything? I clenched my fists, hands out, waiting, ready. Her shoulders were slumped, acid eating her skin, and through the fabric of her dress. She didn't seem to notice. Men and women, witches and mages, are natural enemies. What one wants, the other has to become subjected to provide. It is the natural way. To conceive and continue a line, both are required. The scent of desire, the bonds of possession were created to end the wars. Men are not allowed to attack a woman and vice versa. To do so is to invite immediate death. I stared at her, but that seemed to be all that she had energy for. I ran to her and threw a neutralizing powder over everything to stop the acid from eating her away. Then I put my hands on her face and pulled out her pain. She screamed, and I screamed because she had too much pain, and I should never, ever try to touch another witch's pain. How had I forgotten the first rule? She threw me across the room into a glass door that cracked but didn't shatter. I slid to the floor, body aching from the impact. The skirt had actually broken a lot of the force, so that was nice. I pushed myself to my feet, arms still twined with fire. She screamed at me before she was on top of me. I twisted away, blocking and punching in the perfect rhythm she drilled into me from my earliest memories. She snarled and hissed at me. "Penny, if you make my sacrifice vain, I will destroy you myself." I smiled at her widely. "You can try, Mother." I spun and attacked. Fast, hard, focusing all of my energy on the movement, the space, the flow from one position to another. We could have fought for hours, days. We probably had in the past, but eventually Revere cleared his throat in the doorway, and we both froze. The limo driver is getting anxious. I broke away from my mother, smoothing down my dress and then wincing when the roses became singed. I went to Revere, holding out my hands. He took my hands in his, pulling the flames in his, pulling the flames and pain out of them. For a moment, I saw Drake, felt him lift my fingers to his lips. But when I blinked, there was Revere, his scowl a little harder than usual. They hadn't enjoyed their privacy and isolation being broken by a dragon. "I'd better get back to school." "Aren't you going to change first?" Revere asked. My mother wouldn't notice my ripped and singed gown. I shrugged. "Everything at school is as ridiculous as this. It'll be fine." I went out to the limo, barefoot over the cold ground. The cold seemed far away, like the ends of my limbs. I curled up in a corner of the limo, where he had sat, and closed my eyes. I could smell him, his aftershave and laundry detergent, but not black cherry. Maybe it wasn't real. Maybe it was just in my head. The trip passed in a blur until I got to school, barely remembering to get Senor Mort out of the trunk. People were walking around but stopped to stare when they saw me. I waved at them cheerfully. Too bad I didn't have lollipops to shove down their throats to choke their hungry curiosity. Crazy Penny Lane had finally been dumped by Drake Huntsman, declared unworthy and sent back where she belonged. I walked through the halls back to Lilac Stories, beaming brightly. When I got to Lilac Stories, I flung the door open and stepped inside. This room is so ugly it's almost beautiful. It's good to be home. Did you miss me, ugly floral couch, idiot shepherdess? That's no way to hold your crook in the defense against wolves. You're clearly waiting to be eaten. Stupid ho-ho. Zach came out of his room looking disheveled and smelling rank. "Penny, what are you doing here?" "I'm feeling a lot of things. Burning things. Like this room needs burning. Also redecorating. What color shall we do? I'm feeling black, but Viney would like that too much. Gray would be nice. We could plate the whole thing with inset lighting so it looked like some sci-fi spaceship. Would Echo. Too much. What do you think you're?" I asked, holding up my cage. Senior Mort licked his nose and sniffed. "Yes, yellow is happy, but also fairly hideous. Yellow and lilac would be incredibly awful. We'd better just burn it down." "You're right." Penny, are you okay?" I stared at Zach. He was looking more sober and more confused all the time. "Zachary Stoneborough, my dearest idiot friend. I've been jilted. Revere didn't even get to rip him apart because he flew away on a dragon, green. We should paint it green. Green and green and green." I patted his head as I went towards my room. "Order paint samples, will you?" That's a good mage. He followed me into my room, closing the door behind him while I flung myself across my swinging bed. What do you mean you've been jilted? Do you want all the gory details? He found out that I had no magic and immediately dragged me back to my garret to inform me that he couldn't possibly deign to marry a magicless witch. Last night? I kicked his chest to send my bed swinging higher. He was obliging and planted his feet so I got some good loft. This morning with the dawn in the light of the morning star. It was really beautiful. I had no idea the old lady could look so alive. It was like my grandmama was back. So, he told you he didn't want a witch without magic? I sighed, and then pitch came out and almost killed him. I shook my head. It was the weirdest wedding ever, particularly since it didn't end in actually getting married. He flung himself down beside me, sending the bed rocking wildly, and Drake flew off on a dragon. Was it cute? I nodded and turned to grin at him. Super cute. I think it was the same one at the Crete battle. I wish I'd gotten to pet him. Drake seemed in a hurry. I bet. Huh. I'm really hungover. We could go drinking anyway if you'd like. So I can smell like you? Tempting, but I have other ideas of how to spend the day. He turned and grinned. I bet you do. We gonna trash Drake's room. Less sparkles, more fireballs. I'm all over that. I have this flamethrower that will ignite anything. I wrinkled my nose. It's Tuesday. I'm going to do community service. After that, I want to get in a bar fight. Break chairs. Then I want to meet that mage whose skin belongs to me. Can you schedule a meeting for tomorrow? Dawn. Dawn is the best time for ripping out hearts. He raised his eyebrows. That's fine, but when are we going to hurt Drake? I smoothed down the bodice of the glorious gown. It's not his fault. I should have told him up front. He was perfectly reasonable about it. You know how he's never reasonable. Let's go. When we got to the parking structure, I stopped and stared at the monstrous hulk of dented metal that Zack stopped beside. What is that hideous thing? He stroked the metal side. It's my new car. I got it for a wedding present. You get yourself wedding presents? That's a great idea. I should do that. For you. Look how far the back seat is from the windshield. I was going to work on it while you were on your honeymoon. Looks like you'll have to help me. I was thinking some good electromagnetic shocks to knock out anyone around me so cars pull over dead and I don't get stuck in traffic. Yeah, traffic in Fairfield is awful. I shot him a glance and shook my head. And torpedoes. Definitely torpedoes. What about little techno animals that eject nasty substances on the other cars' windshields? Totally juvenile. I love it. Get in. After the drive to town, Zack put his feet up and snoozed while I went inside the hospital. I went straight for the special human unit after a nurse stopped me, asking if I were okay or if I needed to be checked out by a doctor from my accident. I looked down at my ruined gown and for a second I almost cried. She gasped and said, "Wait, I've heard about this. Is it a destroy the wedding dress photo thing? You're not hurt. Thank heavens." She patted my shoulder and sent me on my way. I smiled while my throat closed up. Right. It was a photo shoot thing. What did I look like? The old lady didn't have tons of mirrors. Because I smashed them, I stopped in a bathroom and stared at my reflection. I looked fine if a bit wide-eyed and crazy. Good. I flung open the doors to the beautifully appointed room holding the human dark side survivors. I went over to the couch and toppled over the back so I was lying on the cushion, staring at the ceiling. Missy jumped away from me, curling into the corner of the couch like I was going to hurt her. Penny, are you okay? This is my wedding dress, is it? I didn't get married, so maybe it's my not wedding dress. It was so pretty. She slid closer to me and cautiously took my hand, squeezing my fingers. You don't have to talk about it. I closed my eyes and hot tears slid down my cheeks. I'm not good enough for him. I don't have magic, Missy. I don't have any magic, so he doesn't want to marry me. I knew this would happen. I knew it, so now I don't have to be afraid because it's all over. Her hand gripped tighter, and I felt her fingers carefully stroke my hair like I was a weasel with a tummy ache. I cried for a long time on that couch with Missy until it was time to go. I sat up and wiped my face on the back of my hands. Thanks for letting me cry. It's not really something I can do with mages and witches. Is it okay? I looked at her one gray eye, searching for whether this made her too uncomfortable. She shook her head and patted my hand. It's good to share sadness. It helps us be human to not feel so alone. If I can help you not feel so alone, I'm glad. I bit my lip and sniffed. Thanks, Missy. She cocked her head and smiled slightly. Also, he's an idiot if he doesn't realize how messed up his life will be without you. I sighed. I think I was actually the mess. It doesn't matter. It's over. Thanks again. I tentatively gave her a hug and she returned it, squeezing me tight until I thought I was going to burst into tears again. Sniffing, I hurried out to the car, slipping into the back seat and tapping Zach on his head. Driver to the pool hall. We have chairs to break. You're going to pay for all of them. He sat up, ran a hand through his messy hair, and grinned at me. I don't think the driver gets stuck with the bill, but since you're clearly unhinged, I'll humor you. Hang on. He drove crazy, which made me feel nauseous even in the back seat. But the pool hall was close. Getting into fights with Zach was fun. Drinking until I was throwing up in the back alley with him afterwards was also fun. Fighting some more was fun. Sighting some more was fun. So much fun. Finally, we were careening up the hill back to Fairfield. We shouldn't drink and drive, but I only told Zach to go faster. When I woke up, I was in Zach's bed, his feet in my face because apparently he'd gone to sleep upside down. Time. I found his wrist and dragged it out of the blankets so I could check the time. What are you doing? He asked, groggy. I grabbed the elixir of death, swallowed enough to bring me wide awake and mostly sober, and passed the bottle to him. What time was the mage going to meet me? Did we miss it? No. We still have 20 minutes. Come on, we have to get in place. Where are the flying pants? He drank a lot of the nasty stuff, wiped his mouth, shuddered a few times, and then we were suiting up. I braided my hair away and pulled on the cute beret that buzzed for a second while microfibers spread down and wrapped my braid, keeping it from flame, and wrapped my braid, keeping it from flame and magic. The gloves were also nice. I'd have a lot of pow even without channeling Pitch, but I'd channel her anyway. The bar fight had made her jealous. She wanted to play. If the mage didn't show up, I'd have to play with Zach. Would he mind? I glanced over at him where he was focused on programming his metallic gloves. If he doesn't come, I'm going to hurt you. He glanced over at me. You're a tough mistress. You don't easily forgive failure. I laughed. It has nothing to do with forgiveness. Pitch wants to play. If you aren't her companion, you're her victim, and then you'll have to heal both of us. Such an inefficient game. He grinned and gripped my hand, his steel-encased fingers squeezing the life out of mine. You are an impossible amount of fun. Let's do this every Tuesday. He let go of my hand, and I shook it out, wincing. My own gloves gave me a little protection, but I was light and quick while he was brute strength. It isn't Tuesday. It's Wednesday. He shrugged and adjusted a metal join beneath his armpit. I could improve that clasp. I'd work on it later, after I could walk. This is still yesterday's party. Come on, Penny. We set up on the roof. Zach carried me up because I wasn't used to the flying pants. I was apparently breaking them in on the fly, right? I was on the top of the building next to the drive while Zach landed on the other building, the one with the boys' gym inside it. It was still dark. A girl with golden curls and a very short skirt waited in front of the package's drop-off area where Signor usually came. She was right on time and looked ridiculously cold. We had a few minutes to try out our spy comms that were little black specks. I'd stuck mine on the top of my nose like a real witch's mole. "Penny, who did you get to double?" "Is that Rhoda? She's got great legs." "Shut it, Zach. Next time I'll put you in a short skirt." "That makes sense. My legs are even better." I rolled my eyes, even though he couldn't see me. "Do you sense anything?" He had amazing sensors built into his suit plus magic. "Not yet. You?" "How was I supposed to sense anything?" "Yeah, a mage with serious mental issues is about to get a headache." The pebble I'd just thrown dinged on his helmet and fell off the building to skitter across the drive towards Rhoda. I thought this was a stakeout. I didn't realize we were trying to draw attention. My bad. "I have a sound system in my suit. Shall I turn it on? Something good? A march, maybe?" "A what?" "Never mind. You're not exactly the most musical person in the world." "Probably the least." "What's that?" "What?" "I don't sense anything." I frowned down at the drive, and even though I couldn't see anything, it seemed like something was flickering down the drive between the buildings, like a force of energy that I could feel tugging on me. "Zach, 15 feet south from Rhoda. Aim at it." When the creature came out of the thin air, Zach hit it almost immediately with a net and stakes that burrowed into the earth, stopping the animal in its tracks. A mage followed, a staff raised that he aimed at Rhoda. She put up a defense shield and threw a herder at him. One of mine, pink and sparkly. It took a second for the cloud to clear, but I didn't have a second. I leapt down, counting on my magic pants to keep me from breaking a leg. I hit the mage and was embraced by the herder storm. But the second I touched him, I yelled into the intercom, "It's Jackson. Go through the energy bubble thing and find the other mage." I pounded Jackson's head on the pavement in the middle of the flying silver specks until he was unconscious. Then I leapt up carrying Jackson. Way too high, so I came down hard on the building I'd recently left. I dropped him, tied him up, and walked over to the edge of the building. Rhoda was still in position, staring at the swirling herder as it died down. Had she not seen me grab Jackson and haul him off? If she hadn't, neither had the mage. The creature was hissing and clawing, scratching itself across its mottled nose, purples and blues blending across its pale snout. It was kind of cute for an animal the size of a car. If I had magic, I could make him turn around and attack whoever had sent it. Maybe shrink it and put it in a cage next to Senior Mort. Magic would be cool and useful. "Zach? Where are you?" I hissed, speaking towards my nose. He wasn't on the building across from me, and the energy bubble was still there, bubbling, probably leading into Darkside. If he didn't come out at the count of 5, I was going in after him. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4.5. A rolling ball of green shot out of the energy bubble. A red-haired mage in a purple suit, at least a suit that used to be purple, rode a crumpled mage across the pavement, his green fire sword at the other mage's throat. For a long time, the world stopped as I stared at Drake, his green eyes visible even at that distance, a mocking smile on his perfectly curled lips. He looked like the worst and most beautiful mage in the world, everything about him alive and compelling, from the somehow intentionally looking mussed hair to his almost careless grip on the green sword. It wasn't the weapon that made him dangerous. It was the intent, the energy, the focus he had, in spite of his seeming carelessness. My downfall, the mage who had chosen practicality over my heart. He's too pretty, Pitch hissed. Zack stepped through the energy bubble into sight and then pointed over his shoulder as he pushed a button. I heard a rumbling and then the energy bubble vanished. Zack. I needed to focus on him instead of the rising darkness, the pain in my chest. Zack, what's going on? He glanced up at me from the drive where I stood on the edge of the roof. One boot up as I leaned over the mess of mages and monsters. Drake was already there when I arrived. Apparently, you're not the only one who wants a piece of this mage. What is he wearing? Yellow and lilac. We could blow him up in lilac stories for our redecorate. I tried to laugh, tried to smile. But Drake was wearing the suit meant for the mage I was going to rip apart. Like he was mocking me, like giving me a broken heart handkerchief. You need to rip him apart, Pitch hissed. Zack froze. Penny, what did you say? The suit and the mage are mine. Penny, you can't attack a mage. It's not. The sound of the herder I threw at Drake cut Zack off and threw him back, but not like it hit Drake. He flew across the pavement while his green sword went the other direction. The herder was very pretty, silver and gold with lot of pretty hearts and stars. I threw another herder while Drake was still down. The first herder's second wave went off at the moment I nailed Drake in the chest with the second herder. The clouds of pink and green smoke filled the drive and visibility became problematic. Also, it wasn't enough to hurt him from a distance. I didn't think about the flying pants. I simply dropped over the edge of the building to land at impact point, otherwise called Drake's chest. The shock of feeling his alive, moving body beneath my boots stunned me almost as much as my herder's next wave. A blinding flash of Penny Huntsman in lightning letters, along with burning confetti. Penny Huntsman. Oh, that hurt worse than the shrapnel and shockwaves. It hurt, pain, sharp, and blinding like my foot in Drake's face. I kicked him until he rolled and hit my leg. I flipped back, kicking him back down again before he scrambled to his feet. I landed and launched myself at him. 3 strikes forward before falling back in the usual pattern of mage martial style. I was worthless without magic, but I could spar better than him in his own style. Drake Huntsman and his stupid prestigious school full of prissy rich mages who couldn't do chemistry or chemists, spellwork or sophists. No, but they had the power. Of course, because money plus magic equals power. Even if you couldn't cast a spell to save your life, even if you couldn't keep your idiot knee uncocked, even if you couldn't follow through on a basic contract. I didn't realize I was screaming until Zack dragged me off the bloody and cracked green mage. I whirled on him hissing. Blue mage, you do not interrupt me when I'm having a conversation. Zack's eyes were brilliant and compelling, but not as beautiful as the mage I loved. Penny, you can't fight a mage. You're breaking the law. I cocked my head until Zack let go of me, but he didn't move back quickly enough. I whirled into him, ash, smoke, pain, breaking his jaw, then slamming him back, followed by a herder. I turned to face Drake, swollen and bloody, but so beautiful, real, claw marks across his cheek that I'd never seen before, old claw marks. He needed a matching set on the opposite side. First, the question of ownership. Drake Huntsman, you're wearing my suit. He grinned at me, teeth bloody, lips swollen. It looks better on me. Wrong answer. I moved in, hard and fast. He blocked, that manic grin on his face while his eyes burned into me. He was very quick and almost precise. But that knee, the shuffle in his reverse, the fact that he'd always underestimate me, were all to my advantage. I went in, then spun away, then back in when he came after me. I unbuttoned his jacket in that movement, then whirling around him, yanked it off his shoulders and kicking him forward between his shoulder blades. He recovered, not even stumbling before he came around. which is what I wanted because that shirt was mine. I struck him, moving around him until I'd plucked off all the buttons and his shirt flapped open in the breeze. I crouched opposite him and grinned. Property of Penny Lane. You still belong to me. I will rip you apart at my slightest whim. His eyes brightened for a moment before darkness clouded his gaze and his lips twisted into a sneer. That's right. I begged you to cut your name into me. Wait, no. That was someone else. His voice was sharp and hard, taunting me. He wanted me to hurt him because he liked it. He liked feeling my fist against his face. He liked my boots in his ribs. Why would he want me to hurt him? I took 2 steps away from him, still crouched, ready, but he didn't follow, didn't pursue, hadn't used a speck of magic or any of his tricks. Sticking to the forms like this was a tournament to be judged according to strict rules. He hadn't hurt me. He wanted me to hurt him. The world spun around me. What about the mage? I'd completely forgotten about him. Why did I care about some pointless mage? He'd hurt Poppy. Hadn't he? I'd hurt Poppy. I'd crushed her when she was vulnerable. Because I could, because she'd hurt me. Left me like Drake had left me. I gasped as a rib shattered. No! I was pain. I wasn't ready to feel, not yet. I turned, searching for the mage I'd wanted so much to capture and destroy. He stood on the edge of the drive, silver confetti swirling around his feet in the wind. You didn't run away. My voice sounded tinny and garbled. The mage. Mitch cocked his head. Short hair, dirty blonde, not matching the gold or blue eye. I've been looking for a new ally. Sooth is last generation. Drake's voice was certain and steady from just behind me. I already told you, I have enough allies. You waste my time. Mitch glanced at Drake, then focused on me, taking 2 steps closer before he stopped. His smile reminding me so much of Poppy, I was certain I was going to throw up all over him. Who said I wanted the green mage? If you ever want a real Darksider to play with, you only have to think of me. He blew me a kiss and vanished. I stared stupidly at the space where he'd been, ears buzzing, ribs aching. Another rib snapped. I gasped and wrapped my arms tightly around myself. Penny, are you okay? Zach sounded so concerned. I didn't turn to look at him. Send Ian to my room, Zach. I don't want to see you for a while. I leapt as far as I could in my flying pants, coming down too hard on the muddy, slushy green. My leg twisted, and I started hopping. I made it to Lilac's stories, into my room, and crashed across my bed. Tears fell, but not from the pain I'd given Drake and myself through my infinitely frustrating empathy. Is that why he wanted me to hurt him? Because that would hurt myself, and he found that ironic and funny? I had the purple coat. I held on to it, pressing my face into the silk lining, inhaling deeply and smelling dragon. But mostly Drake.
Blooming Black, Chapter 27. I watched her go, would have followed her except that Zach grabbed my arm, yanking me back. I should kill you. It took me a moment to get the fury under control and turned to him with a civil smile. Only if you could. I dislike a lack of follow-through. He snarled at me, eyes bright and burning, like contracting with a witch and jilting her at the last minute. I snapped my fingers. Exactly like that. Mages who do that should be sacrificed to the gods of broken contracts. Tell me, Zach, why does she want Ian in her room? Why did you want the same mage we were after? Are you stalking her? I narrowed my eyes at him. I'm hunting the sorcerer. That miserably dressed dark-side mage worked with him, still does for all I know. The sorcerer who is after Penny. And Pitch, I added with my own snarl. My hands ached to grip his throat and squeeze the life out of him. Why didn't you tell me? I would have right after you told me about your dragon. I clenched my teeth while he smiled pleasantly in spite of the goose egg rising on his forehead. Penny packed a mean punch. I suppose we all have our secrets, and hers weren't yours to tell. Zack glanced around at the witches and mages who had gathered, probably alerted to the action by Penny's shockingly brilliant herders. I should be skinned for letting her think for a moment that there was anything subpar about her. Your room, drinks, ice. You can tell me your story. It has to be a good one with such an impressive ending. He glanced around again, this time at the drive, the crater where I'd been. Penny Huntsman. It made me want to tear out someone's hair. Maybe mine. I nodded and stepped through side, coming back into my black bedroom that still had traces of pink glitter. I got ice in towels and went to the door to open it for Zack. He stole my towel of ice and put it to his forehead before he crashed onto the couch. "What will you have to drink?" I asked, pouring myself a cup of orange bergamot tea. "I'll have what you're having." I raised my eyebrow, then shrugged and brought him over his own steaming cup of the golden liquid. I sat beside him, stretched my legs out on the coffee table with the warm cup on my stomach and sighed. Things were going so well. I almost had Darkside under control. He'd been setting up deals for weeks, months maybe. I shrugged. When he put them through, I found myself at something like the low range of Dayside mages, maybe 78th wealthiest family. It's going to keep going down. Zack choked on his tea and sat up straight. "You're kidding me. You really dumped Penny at the altar over money?" I glared at him. "She came here to marry you. Your family is now number one. Congratulations." I took a long sip of the scalding tea. "It's not just the money." "No, of course not. My family is now vulnerable to Sooth. I can't protect her from him with my powerful Daysider family when he's controlling it. I could protect her in Darkside better than I can here, and she needs a strong Dayside mage up here." I closed my eyes and tried to make the rest of the world go away. Tea didn't help, but nothing did, and tea felt like the right. "So, she still needs to be married? Before her 18th birthday? Because of the curse? I think it's the Daysider's contract." Zack scowled at me. "If she's a magicless Daysider, her protection would transfer to her Dayside spouse's family as long as she's married by 18. I always thought that was a bizarre law. How often do you have aberrations?" "They're illegal to create. They cause too many wars, the kind that tear apart worlds." He grinned. "I never thought you'd say that. Too many wars, it's like you're a changed mage." His smile drained and he shook his head. "Why tell her that she has to get married to save her mother? That's the odd thing about all this. I'm fairly certain her father's the deception sorcerer who cursed all Creek females until they delivered her to them. That's a rather impressive curse. Deception sorcerers mess with people's heads." "Ask me how I know. That's where her memory gaps come from. That picture of the sorcerer and the toes, it's him. I bet my second favorite pair of cufflinks on it." Zack ran a hand through his hair. "Couldn't you have told her the truth about why you couldn't marry her? Why did you have to make her feel like she was worth less because of her lack of magic? You know that makes her the most valuable witch in Dayside or Darkside. That thing you threw in her face." I shifted uncomfortably. She fought beautifully. Wasn't she exquisite? Not a drop of magic and still able to defeat the chemist captain at his own fight? Exquisite. That's Penny, also schizophrenic, and you're not helping any. "Why did you lie to her?" I glanced at him. "She can't remember her father except in random scribbles. Her family who knows her best knew that she would sacrifice her life for her mother's happiness. Would she sacrifice it to save herself? She isn't suicidal, maybe, but she's probably fatalistic." "You recognize your own characteristics in her? I suppose you think I should marry her now. She might not want to ever get married, whatever the consequences. She might run off and join Soothe so she can watch him rip out your soul and eat it with ketchup." "I don't have a soul." "Then what's so crushed? You're going to have to work harder if you don't want her to realize that you're in love with her." I closed my eyes. I'm not. If I didn't love her, why did my heart hurt so much? Why did my hands feel so numb, like nothing was real without a penny to hold? If I loved her, would I be able to let her go? Apparently. I feel almost good about letting you have her, except for the part where you ripped out her heart and fed it to your dragon. Don't talk about that. You'd rather I talk about taking Penny to community service in her ripped wedding dress where she spent hours crying on the couch with the one-eyed human. You'd rather I tell you that every injury she gave you, she'll acquire in her weird energy empathy thing, and Ian is in her bedroom healing her. He's good at healing. She told me. You suck. I'm better than I was. It's true. Every word she screamed was true. My knee is cocky, just like the rest of me. I was so close to happiness, Zach. I could feel it, taste it, hold it in my arms. I broke it. I broke her heart. I'll never... A knock sounded on my door. I glanced at Zach, because it was a weird knock, sharp, persistent, endless, and tormenting as a final exam. A teacher, we both said in unison. Zach winced. You better answer it. Maybe look a little more respectable. I scowled and rose, snapping my fingers to start the spell of foul respectability. I regained my jaunty, jerky swagger by the time I reached the door, now wearing an impeccable suit instead of the purple one. I opened the door, and there was Her Supreme Majesty, Mesdame Klotch, the headmistress of Rosewood. I blinked at her. Good morning. It's a little early for a surprise inspection, but if you'd like to explore the depths of my bedroom, by all means, enter. She lifted her nose. You will accompany me to my office. She turned and started walking. I ground my teeth and almost snapped her head off of her neck, but swallowed down the monstrous urge and followed. The walk went by with far too many students up and about, staring at me like I was on my way to death row. Didn't they know it was rude to stare? Apparently not. Sit, she said, once we had reached her immaculate office, all white and dark wood, so pristine and deadly boring, like Penny's lab. Maybe Klotch had hidden depths like my Penny. Not my Penny. I sank down into the chair she gestured towards, barely keeping upright instead of sagging down in a heap of defeated idiocy. What do you need, madame? I have class to prepare for and other important nonsense. She narrowed her eyes at me, the color quite stunning, blues a tad lighter than wits. They were distantly related. A witch attacked a mage. You know the law. I frowned deeply while I considered my words carefully. She was defending her property. You see, I borrowed something of hers, and she wanted it back. Then she should have stolen it back, or, better yet, reported the crime to the authorities. There have been far too many instances lately of inappropriate conduct, from floating teacups to the selling of unlicensed herders on school property. There's something against floating teacups. Where is that written? I could have sworn I'd memorized the entire student handbook. How could I have missed such an important rule? She narrowed her eyes at me. You study the student handbook, no doubt to get inspiration of what rules there are that you haven't yet broken. I've overlooked a great deal for the sake of Penny Lane's special circumstances, but half the school watched her make a crater in the driveway with your head. What is your statement? I licked my lips and stared at the small sphere she held in her hand, recording every word. So this was going to be a legal issue. I broke a contract. Penny was acting in the role of her guardian to administer the penalty. She was being gentle. If it had been an act of war, an illegal attack, why would we have fought without magic? We only used mage forms, other than the herders which her guardian made. I will absolutely sue this school and put my family crest over your desk if you ever suggest that Penny Lane would break the one law. And Jackson. We found him on a roof. So, he claims that she skinned him alive. I wanted to rub my temples and turn this office into a smoking heap of rubble, Madame Klotch in pieces at the bottom. Instead, I smiled. Did he? Does he have proof? What would she do with mage skin? Her eyes narrowed even more. Drake, that witch of yours cannot flaunt every rule without consequence. I will not have my school turned into a war zone. You don't understand the danger, but if it begins, the war between witches and mages, it can last for years. The last one was in Darkside 25 years ago in a small, remote area. When we got there, there wasn't anyone to execute. This isn't a game, Drake. I know that you enjoy tormenting witches, but you must be cautious, or you will start something that you cannot contain, and it might consume our world. I sighed. She was being so responsible and logical. I stood up, point taken. Actually, I'm no longer interested in bad behavior. It might not last, but for the meantime I'm consumed with business and family issues. No time for fun. She studied me for a long time before she nodded. Keep yourself clean. The girl has gotten everyone's attention. If she steps wrong, she'll be gone one way or another. You're excused. She said that just so she could feel in charge because I was leaving anyway. I paused and bowed very low. Thank you. I hope your day is as delightful as yourself. I did not slam the door on my way out. I did step immediately through side and came out in huntsman manner. It was cavernous and empty in spite of the housekeeper. I went into the library, but instead of heading towards the alcohol, I went to the bookshelves. What had Sooth been reading? It took a second before the recall came back with clarity. I piled the books on the table and began the day's school lesson. The housekeeper came in with breakfast, her pot of orange bergamot exactly according to my instructions. When I summoned tea, it had to come from somewhere. It burned my tongue. I nodded to her to keep it coming as I worked. I opened my laptop and cross-checked notes until I looked up because she was turning on the lights and drawing the curtains for the evening. A day had passed. My first day without Penny Lane. The housekeeper left with a slight smile. She had no idea what to do without Jasper. We'd be fine. We'd cope. I unbuttoned my shirt one button at a time, unspelling until the gold satin had taken its real color. She'd made a voodoo doll for the mage, Mitch, and dressed him in a violet and gold suit. In reality, he wore yellow and lilac. Coincidence? I smiled as I leaned back and closed my eyes. I dug my claws into my chest, feeling Penny Lane as though she were beside me. Penny Huntsman, I'm sorry.
Blooming Black, Chapter 28. I slept through that day and most of the next night. When I woke up, my shoulder throbbed, aching, as though Signor had sank his fangs into me. Why did he have fangs into me? I rubbed my shoulder. My heart ached, and my whole body felt like it was made out of lead. But honestly, it wasn't worse than the weeks right after Poppy died. I hurt, sure, but I wasn't crazy like my mother, was I? How could I possibly know? I'd kind of gone insane on Drake. No, I hadn't really hurt him, and that's why Ian had taken ages to heal me, because my skin wasn't all torched off and shredded with embedded shrapnel. Also, my head liberally concussed from me smacking him down. I rubbed my shoulder, and for a moment it felt like Drake was there, holding me in his arms. But I gasped and let go because it hurt. It hurt so much to feel him love me when it was a lie. I was too stupid. I believed he loved me even if he threw me away at one telephone call. What business had it been? I grabbed my laptop and started researching. Huntsman had taken a sudden and unexpected dive, which had caused stocks to crash all over. My own business, Darkly Sweet, was affected as well. I exhaled and glared at my screen. His business wasn't doing great, so he needed someone richer than me. That's what it was. Maybe if I'd had magic, he would have felt like I could come up with some gold somewhere. Would I hear an announcement of another engagement? Maybe he'd marry Wit or Vine. Viney would marry him in a second. Anyone would. He was perfect. Perfectly wicked. My stomach rumbled. Weird. After Poppy, I'd hardly eaten for months. I shrugged and rolled out of bed. I got dressed for classes in my most adorable outfit, bathing, shaving, triple lotioning my long legs until I felt as polished as one of Drake's inner circle. Maybe I didn't have the wealthiest family and couldn't do magic, but at least I could look nice. I snuggled Senior Mort until it was time to go to breakfast. I was the first one in line. I piled up my plate, went to the little table in the corner where we sat and ate until all the students were gone and I was alone, sitting at our table without him. Everything in my stomach felt like a rock, heavy and roiling. A wonderful combination. I walked slowly back to Lilac Stories. I didn't notice Rhoda until I walked into her where she'd parked in the hall in front of me. "How did you do that?" she demanded. I stared at the adorable blonde girl with a hot pink t-shirt beneath her uniform vest. I shouldn't have. I feel like I'm going to throw up. Way too many eggs. Her eyes narrowed and her nose twitched with barely contained energy. Fighting Drake. How did you do that? How did you do that? That was mage style. Was it a spell, something that copied him? I patted her head and walked around her. My mother thought it would be amusing if I knew how to beat a mage at his own game. Aren't mothers wonderful? Penny, she said, falling in beside me like she didn't have a class to get to. What about Jackson and the monster? You just left us all there and flew away. Half of the school saw the whole thing. The monster? I frowned as I tried to remember the mottled snout of the huge beast that had come barreling out of Darkside straight at Rhoda. It was lucky she hadn't gotten gobbled. Don't worry, Rhoda. We'd fish you out his stomach if he'd snacked you. I patted her again and headed into Lilac Stories, the ugliest place in the world. Had the paint samples arrived, I went to Zach's room and would have picked the lock, but he'd left it open. Zach, are you sleeping? With your door open? Suicidal mage. I dropped my bag on the lump under the blankets. I brought you bagels, mostly because I couldn't eat them. I went to the poster of Pitch. Action shot. All black tight suit with her white face, black lipstick, and blacker eyes. She was so cool, particularly with the mustache. I patted her cheek, and the wall slid up and away to reveal the tech shop. I rifled through the cupboards and crates, taking this and that, adding it to the counter in the center. Zach groaned and stayed where he was. I shrugged and got out the welder. After my class time, I put everything away very nicely and headed out. I locked the door behind me, just in case Viney was feeling bored. World's history with Professor Vale was nice enough. She wore a white powdered wig with her black leather pants as she explained about the Reformation. Or something. I couldn't seem to concentrate. The next class was a lot like that. It was just a little bit foggy, like the world was a bit misty, or maybe I was foggy. Ashes, smoke, something bad. I tried to focus on my math class. Then in conversations, but I felt like I was waiting for something, someone that never came. Zach didn't come either. I realized what it was in ballet when I walked into my class and saw Drake standing at the bar in his soft black pants, white t-shirt, stretching his incredibly flexible feet. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't like holding your breath. It was like a monster stuffing your head in its mouth and sucking out all the oxygen you've ever had in your lungs, and then biting down until your heart is punctured by its fangs. I turned and staggered out of class, down the hall to the nearest exit, out into the windy, sleety day. I sat down in the mud in my pale pink leotard, while my heart shattered over and over and over and over again. However tightly I held my knees or pressed my eyes against them, I couldn't stop the horrible, awful pain. I don't know how long I stayed there before Viney grabbed me around the waist and hauled me upright. She was so short she could fit her head under my armpit. I shivered as she dragged me to my room. Once we got there, she ran water in my tub and pushed me in, still wearing my leotard. I suppose, since it was wet, it really didn't matter. Are you going to get sick? She put her fingertips to my forehead like she'd seen it on a movie or something. I'll get Zach. No. I grabbed her hand and held on until she turned to me, arms crossed, glaring. Why not? He's skipping today anyway. I frowned at the rising water. I'm okay. I don't need any mage to take care of me. It was just the shock. That's it. Tomorrow will be better. She knelt down and grabbed my hand, dark eyes bright and fiery. You're right. That's not what you need, some idiot mage. You saw him in ballet. I nodded and squeezed my eyes tight, but I could still see him. Expression serene, untouched, completely indifferent to the world around him. He hadn't seen me, probably wouldn't have noticed me. If he had, he'd closed the door of his heart to me, shutting me out. Penny, it's fine. You aren't acting fine, but I'm sure that you'll get over Drake. I'm not over Drake, and he didn't try to make me fall in love with him, but you'll probably... She broke off and squeezed my hand so hard I winced. She swore rather loudly for a long time before she sank down on the floor, still holding my hand. It makes no sense. He worked so hard to throw it all away. His business is down. I think he's going to marry the richest witch he can find. They're always doing that in dramas. She rolled her eyes. While your life may seem like a drama, Drake isn't going to marry anyone for something that heartless. He might marry a human girl for her money, but not a witch. I frowned at her. She was making no sense, but it didn't matter because the pain had gone numb enough that I could realize that I was in my leotard in my tub, and my ballet slippers were completely ruined. I sighed and climbed out, dripping water all over Viney. Where are you going? I wrung out my hair. It wasn't great, but I wasn't going to see Drake anyway. I need to get to class. Will you help me with my hair? Something to hide the mud? Braids or something to hide the mud? Braids or something? She rolled her eyes, but set to work with her nimble little fingers, rolling and twisting my hair, pausing and making me hold it up while she ran to get something. She brought back strands of gold, studded with jewels, that she wove into my hair until it was wrapped on my head like a crown, strands falling down that weren't muddy and a mess. It probably took longer than just washing my hair, but drying was another matter. Maybe I could get Viney to use drying magic on my hair. When I suggested it, she snorted and referred me to a hairdryer. By the time I got to dressage, I looked more pulled together than you needed to deal with horses, but that was fine since I mostly groomed Henrietta, and she seemed to appreciate my hair, kept mouthing it. She missed Zach being in this class. So did I. When I walked out, I couldn't help but notice that witches stared at me. I didn't overanalyze why they were staring or what thoughts went on behind their eyes. On my way to chemistry, I got a text from Vine. She was keeping me updated on Drake's location so I could avoid him. He was going to be coming down my hall in a few seconds. I ducked into the nearest hall and ran past students who got fewer and fewer in between until I found myself in the part of the school where they'd held the ball. I found a small alcove and leaned against the wall. Heart pounding, but it hadn't shattered. Perfect. When I got the all clear from Viney, I headed in the wrong direction and got completely turned around. I was going to be late for chemistry. I wandered up and down stairs, through locked and unlocked rooms until I came to a set of stairs that met on a landing which held a portrait of my grandmama. I stood there staring at the portrait for a long time. The title beneath it read, Penelope Rose and Horace Wood. But that was my grandmother. Maybe younger and a bit more austere than the witch I knew, but definitely her. So you really did found Rosewood. Has it lived up to all of your expectations? I know I haven't. I tried. I was so close. You did admirably. The voice was gentle for wit, but still harsh enough to put my back up. I didn't turn around, and she continued after a moment's pause. I think we can safely say that if neither you nor I could catch Drake, he's not going to be caught. It's a pity, all those genetics going to waste. You have her eyes. I glanced over at Wit, who stared up at the portrait beside me, the picture of the perfect, neat, and tidy student. You admire her? Why? She laughed and gave me a momentarily condescending glance before she refocused on the image. Madame Rose was a world maker. She didn't conquer in the conventional sense, but the world we live in has her impression more than any other day or darksider. She was a master contract witch. I didn't think that witches did contracts. She laughed. No one told her that, or if they did, she ignored them. She was determined to change things, and the only way she could see to do that was to influence policy on every level. For 50 years, nothing was signed or passed without her examining it. She became the law, justice, mercy, all rolled into one extremely gentle and kind person. She could persuade as well as any deception sorceress without ever using anything for her own personal gain. She was a guardian of our worlds, both day and dark side. Yes, Penny Lane, I admire her. Ambition, vision, determination, charm. She's what power can look like in the right hands. Usually, power corrupts. Well, usually we're already corrupt and seek power to advance our already selfish agendas. But sometimes selflessness becomes selfishness when long-range goals of lifting everyone also lift yourself. She shook her head, a touch of awe in her voice. I don't suppose it would impress you to know that she threw a fabulous tea party. Her lips twitched and she gave me an arch glance. No one's perfect. She turned and left me but called over her shoulder. The best revenge is happiness. I could never begin to achieve that, but maybe you can. I stood there through the rest of chemistry, staring at Grandmama, the greatest contract witch ever. That didn't take magic, just meticulous attention to detail, imagination, and, of course, an immense breadth of knowledge. Grandmama had talked about things like worst possible outcome combined with unforeseen events and how to allow that into your calculations. But I'd thought she was talking about sewing. She made the most perfect ruffles. After class, I went to meet Ian to practice our routine. He wasn't there, so I worked alone, practicing until it was time for dinner. I checked my phone. Drake was at dinner. That meant that I wouldn't be. I headed to the library, found a table where I could spread out the tomes on contract law, and got to work. When Lester sat beside me, I nodded but didn't look at him. I had things to do, serious things like take over the world. While I studied, I would have memories of my grandmama's face or her voice as she explained something. I nodded to the book because she had told me all of those laws of Darksider nature only backwards and inside out. I missed dinner, and it was after 2 when I finally got up stretched and noticed that Lester was still there. He gave me a seductive nod. "You're working hard. What is your topic?" I shrugged and gathered the books together. I was finished with these ones. Do we need to reshelve? Or does it do it magically? Leave the books. It gives Oscar something to be irritated about. He loves being irritated. You can't do magic on magic books, or it might cause an accident. I'll walk with you. Tell me if I understand correctly. Contracts bind a mage's soul, but mages don't have souls. Correct. I wrinkled my nose. So the thing that mages have instead of a soul can be captured and chained by a contract which acts like an external conscience, guiding a mage where a soul would a human. Humans can choose to ignore their conscience. A mage cannot ignore a contract. Pain? He shook his head, his longish hair brushing his cheekbones. It isn't sensation that stops a mage but chains. There is no resistance. It's like a necromancer raising a corpse. The body must obey. The contract is the master. So, the devil's contract, the one that keeps humans from being taken to Darkside, how does that work? Did all the mages and witches in Darkside sign it, so they are bound to the contract? That kind of thing would be better called a policy than a contract. There's not the same hold as an individual contract, except for the actual witches and mages who signed the Devil's Treaty. They are held by the contract to enforce the law on other Darksiders. So the whole world of Darkside can be controlled by the enforcement of the group of witches and mages who signed the treaty. So they were really powerful then. Lester nodded. Very powerful. It was a strange treaty. There must have been a lot of dealing behind closed doors to get all of those extremely powerful people to agree to something that doesn't seem to benefit any of them. I frowned as I stared into space. My grandmama had organized something of that magnitude. Maybe she used the fur sunbather to seduce them all into doing it. And the witches, how had she gotten them on her side? And why did she care so much to work so hard for something that, while good, was hardly essential to her personal survival or even happiness? Would my mother know? She only talked about my grandmama's will, never about her. In Lilac stories, Zack was sitting on the arm of the hideous couch, glaring at me the second he saw me. His gaze shifted to Lester. Lester. "Be careful. When the witch gets hungry, she'll eat anything. Penny, you missed dinner." I turned to Lester. I'd forgotten about him for a second. "Right. See you later." I almost walked past Zack, but he grabbed my arm and yanked me closer, his eyes bright and furious. "I expected you to spend all day in med. Why did you go to class?" I blinked at him. Professor Vale wore a wig. How could I possibly miss that? I was in your class. "You should have noticed." I pulled away. But he didn't unclasp his fingers, and they were hard, unyielding mage fingers. "You aren't stable. You could have freaked out again, attacked Drake like the last time in front of witnesses' teachers. You have a loyal following of witches who are looking for a cause to fight for. Do you want to start a witch and mage war?" I frowned at him. "You sound like my mother, macaroons and lollipops. I'm not going to attack Drake again." "Probably." "No, you're going to sit in the rain in your leotard like a pathetic kitten someone threw away." I shoved him away from me, enough anger and energy in it that he took a step back. "I'm coping, Zack. I got broken by a mage, and I'm trying to find a way to keep it together. Sitting in my room and staring at the swing he hung for me might be the way to go. But personally, it sounds more crazy-making than trying to act like I'm not pieces stuck together with cheap, tacky glue. Now we can talk about the new tech suit we're going to work on, or I'm going to bed. It's been a very long day." He closed his eyes for a moment before he shook his head. "Right, the tech suit. I saw that you'd gotten started on something. Do you have a materials list? I'm sorry I was out of it. I was dealing with the Nero for a long time last night." "Nero?" "It's something between a mammal and a lizard. The size of my old car. It's kind of an endangered species in Darkside. But the habitat is gone these days, and it's only held in captivity. The thing is, we can't just let it free or it'll kill random Darksiders, unless they're the sort who could use it and catch it, which would be it killing not random Darksiders, but not ours either. I convinced someone to use it in some fighting, but had to get it set up and find a trainer, and it was a long night, like you said. I thought we'd work on the car first, tech suit later." I shrugged. Those pauses had Drake's name in them. He filled up every pause and hesitation in my life. That's why it was so important to boldly and rashly leap without looking or thinking. I don't mind doing two things at a time. "What about your herders?" "I can't." I crossed my arms and shivered. I might be getting a delayed reaction to this morning's icy mud bath. "We'll talk about more stuff tomorrow. I hope it works out with the Nehru. It was really cute." He smiled then. "It was. Night. If you need to hold my hand or anything, you know how to pick my lock."
Blooming Black, Chapter 29. You dumped her, so why are you stalking her? Wit's voice carried clear and amused. I glanced over at the doorway to the lab. Witches were rightfully hesitant to enter the mage lab. Wit was not alone. The sight of the two black-haired witches, one short, spikes and leather twining her wrists, the other tall, perfectly proportioned, made me pause. Wit and Viney did not join their forces together for any reason. "Ladies, what brings you here this evening?" Wit tossed her hair, but let Viney speak. "I thought you decided to give her space. Why were you chasing her around?" I glanced at Wit. She'd been standing in front of a door I desperately wanted to go through earlier today, so I'd been stalking Penny. That was good to know. Was it her scent, her energy, her sweetness that I'd been unconsciously tracking? I smiled as charmingly as possible. I pursue a girl, I reject her, I pursue her again. Does that not sound like me? Viney rolled her eyes while Wit smiled, a terrible smile. It was her turn. You don't pursue, so... No, not particularly. I understand, Drake. I understand everything except the part at the end where you completely choke. You're supposed to be the mage with follow-through, the one who delivers. Instead, you ran away from the wedding like a frightened little boy. Viney nodded, glancing at Wit, then at me. If you're done with Penny, why were you watching over her in the rain, keeping anyone from seeing her until I could get there? You aren't anyone's guardian angel, so why would you bother? I stood up and walked over to them. I could be her guardian devil. Why not? She's a curiosity. Even if I'm done dating her doesn't mean she isn't fascinating. You two are interested, or you wouldn't be here. Wit's eyes narrowed. Things have been different, changing over the last few years. Dayside, darkside, it's become tangled and messy. Cree fighting in Dayside for a sorcerer. That shouldn't happen. A witch like Penny Lane and her friend Pitch playing with mages and breaking all the rules of what a witch should be and how a witch should act. It's the rise of a new age, a new era. If we're going to survive, if our families are going to adapt in this next period, we have to be more than slightly curious about the characters who will change the world, even if they are incredibly annoying. Viney scowled at Wit. So annoying, she muttered before she shook her head and glared at me. Drake, what's going on with Huntsman Inc.? Did you really require your armies swear field to you? Why? What's going on? Is there going to be another attack? Bigger, you're part of this mess, dragging it into our world. We deserve to know. A deception sorcerer has taken personal interest in me. That's who I've been fighting in Darkside, well, half the time. It has nothing to do with Penny Lane. She's a charming girl, but I find myself unable to overcome my original distaste for witches in general. You own each other. That's not going to just go away, Wit hissed. She's not the only one who's going to be left pathetic and miserable in the rain, Drake. If you don't have regular physical contact with the witch holding your bond, it will hurt you beyond compare. How you hurt Ian. I did watch him suffer. Not entirely appealing, but pain is proof that we're still alive. I might not be certain otherwise. I walked past them, done with the conversation even though they were probably considering an alliance. I couldn't tell Penny Lane that I'd left because I couldn't protect her. She would never marry another mage if she knew I loved her. My chest ached. Maybe I should have contacted Rhoda instead of Viney to come and rescue Penny, but Viney was solid, predictable, a friend more than a fan. I was halfway to my room when Ian dropped in beside me, Wit and Viney uniting to go against the monstrous Drake Huntsman, Slayer of Hearts. How did it go? Are you quite reformed? I rubbed the back of my neck. Possibilities. Beg your pardon. That's what Mitch called Penny. I don't think he's currently working with Sooth. I raised the small vial I'd been working on in the lab. I'm going hunting. I'd invite you to join me, but I have no intention of sharing. Ian raised his eyebrows. Impressive. You figured that out on your own? Find the sorcerer, kill him? Sorcerers are very hard to kill. Why don't I come? I promise to only watch. I shrugged. I could use you as a source. What's mine is yours. Are you certain this is a good idea, Drake? He's a deception sorcerer that has been toying with you for a while. He knows exactly how to manipulate you. I don't particularly care. Ah, a suicide mission. Excellent. Don't think I'm him and try to kill me, all right? Maybe I shouldn't go. Why am I so generous? I grabbed his neck and pulled him with me through side, into the pale sands that burned the eyes as they reflected the red-hot sun. The burning lands. I paced out the pattern for 2 hours while Ian sat in a lawn chair beneath a large umbrella drinking cool drinks. Finally, when the sun was setting, I opened the vial and sprinkled the liquid onto the central design. Green flared through the entire pattern while the concoction bubbled and chased down the lines. I closed my eyes and could see the pattern on my eyelids, a highly stylized map of Darkside. The sorcerer, there. I didn't think twice but stepped through side, Ian barely grabbing my sleeve in time. We came out in Deadside. I stood beside Ian, staring at the shelled-out buildings, nothing stirring in the sporadic breeze besides bits of fabric in the shadows of the broken structures. I walked over the pitted and cracked ground while the wind tugged on my jacket. Deadside was the home of most necromancer sorcerers. They preferred the dead to the living. Those piles of rags were probably zombies holding to the shadows until night fell. It was coming soon. I sniffed the air and, of course, smelled death, but that heap of flapping fabric smelled alive. I walked over and yanked it up until a kid dangled down, his black eyes bright and angry in his pale face. I squinted at him. Was he Sooth? He kicked me, very narrowly missing a tender place. You don't belong here. This place is for the necromancers, not you pretty daysider. And you're a necromancer? I asked, studying him with interest. You're a little young to have a zombie horde, aren't you? I put him down and brushed off his incredibly filthy garb, which only managed to send a puff of dust into the air. He stood tall, eyes brighter than ever. He was adorable. He reminded me of Senior Mort right before he bit my face. Penny Lane. I closed my eyes for a moment while my chest ached. It took me a moment to open my eyes and study him. I'll pay you 10 times what the deception sorcerer is. He probably won't pay you anything. You know how they are. You think you're getting paid, but they're doing it out of your own funds and cutting themselves a percentage while they're at it. He frowned. You're a bills collector? Ian whispered low. Why is he speaking English? That was the first I'd noticed. I glanced at Ian and then back at the child. I've come to collect a debt. Yeah. He stole money from you? Money, Army's property. Quite a bit. How did your English get so good? Have you been to Dayside? His face went even more sullen, which I hadn't thought possible. Dark eyes intense against his pale skin. He had a lot of expression for a Darksider. Ah, he wasn't. By any chance was your father the human necromancer everyone was trying to get rid of? He blinked at me and then attacked. The zombie horde was quite impressive. The ground opened up and out came a stream of rotting, noxious flesh. I grabbed the kid, hand firmly around his throat. If you're half human, you're a Daysider. It's natural for you to feel conflicted. You're not crazy or pathetic when you feel things, when you care about your monsters. My father wasn't human, he screamed, pounding me with his little fists. I'd have bruises. His father was definitely human. How did the deception sorcerer find you? Also, if you keep this up, I'll just kill you and then all your pet zombies. It takes time to gather up such a fine collection. There are some preservation spells I could teach you. Without the raw magic of a Darksider, you'll need tricks. I don't need tricks. He was like one of those horror movie-possessed children, eyes black to the rim of his lids, pale-faced and convulsing. I put him to sleep, took over his zombies, and sent them to bed as well. They sank back into the earth, crust covering them, while I tossed the boy to Ian. He caught him and frowned at me. What are you going to do with him? I shrugged. He's a Daysider. A necromancer Daysider. He can't go running around Earth gathering up corpses. You know that. I think his father's one of my clients. I'll ask him what he wants to do with him. You think a human could possibly raise this? He lifted the bundle of rags with a curl of his lips. I shrugged and turned away from him. He'd fought the human necromancer with me. He knew perfectly well what he was capable of. I sniffed and stepped carefully over the ground. Knowing it held thousands of zombies made the walk from one cracked building to another slightly more exciting. The sorcerer was in my nostrils, my veins, just ahead of me, over that rise through the abandoned village. Well, abandoned of the living. The hut on the outskirts of the town had a goat on the roof. It raised its blood-red eyes as it chewed a mouthful of ash-coated sod. I inhaled deeply and blew like the big bad wolf. The hut shimmered and melted into a different kind of building. It reminded me of Penny's mother's house, tall, sharp-roofed and gingerbreaded, but this house was painted a cheerful, sunny yellow. The goat clambered down from the porch roof and came towards me at a gallop, sparks flying from its hooves as it ran. A sharp whistle brought it to a sudden halt. It turned and trotted back to the porch. The sorcerer sat there, soothed, his hair light red, eyes pale blue, nose red and peeling like he had a constant sunburn. He seemed my father's age. He gestured to me. Ian kept his distance, managing to look bored and slightly irritated. Welcome to my humble home. What can I do for you? Die said pleasantly. I shot him. It didn't hit him naturally. He materialized on the other side of the porch, gazing towards the town with a slight frown. I'm disappointed. All your innate talent, your power, and you shoot me? That's a conventional Dayside firearm. What is that going to do against a sorcerer? I shot him again. He materialized in a different position on the steps. I just like watching magic tricks. do another one. I shot him again, and this time when he materialized, the spell I'd already prepared exploded, tying him down to one place, one form, the original figure in the chair. He blinked at me, eyes wide for a split second before he smiled. "Very pretty. You've made it so that I can't run. I'll have to fight you. I'd rather not. I like watching your magic tricks. They're very pretty." I slashed him across the face, claws long and diamond sharp. His face was ribbons, white bone visible for a moment, blood exploding in the air before he pulled it back together. I paused because my chest ached, stung and burned, like Penny hurt. I stepped away from him. He cocked his head and smiled at me, his face still melting back together. He looked like a psychotic sorcerer for the first time in that moment, his features all distended and terrible. "You're bound to the child. Do you like to hurt her as much as it would take to destroy me?" I took another step away from him. "How?" He snarled suddenly, lunging towards me. "She's a carefully created aberration that belongs to me, body, soul, every particle of her is wrapped up in my magic. You can't break her curse, mage." His eyes glowed an unholy color orangish red while his nostrils flared. When his hand found my throat, I let him sink his curses into me, layers and layers that twisted around my soul. But they couldn't catch hold of me. He didn't have any toehold into my soul. If I'd married Penny, he would. As her father in Darkside, he held the contract over her. He frowned, brows drawing together. "You didn't marry her?" "No, I didn't. I wanted to reach into his chest and pull out his heart, but I took a finger instead. A pinky." He roared in fury while I stepped through side, Ian coming out in my bedroom a step after me. Ian dropped the baby necromancer on the couch and wiped his hands on the fine Italian wool jacket I had draped over the back of it. That was boring. "If I hurt him, it hurts her. I can't do that." I tossed the pinky on the coffee table. "How long do you think I can go without touching her?" "She's bound to you. I'd say a week, 2. More than that, and it'll start messing with your mind, not to mention your body. So that's her father, a dark-side sorcerer who thought it would be pleasant to create an aberration. Why would he do that? What could he benefit from?" I poured myself a cup of tea with trembling fingers. My chest still ached. Penny still hurt from my attack. So her convulsing in the parking lot could have been something related to the sorcerer being harmed. I had to break that curse. There had to be a way. In the fairy tales, a prince had to kiss the princess, but that didn't work for mages and witches. You need a curse master. Ian held out a hand for a cup of tea. I poured him one and made a face. "Since when do you drink tea?" He shrugged. "Penny is an excellent mistress. An aberration, that's a witch with mage energy, isn't it?" I gritted my teeth. I shouldn't have brought Ian. If you ever breathe a word... He waved his hand dismissively. That explains so much about her. She really can take and give energy to mages. She can really love a mage, sleep with one, trust one. So she really does love you in a sweet, charming, authentic way, not in an obsessive, manipulative, controlling way. So all that time waiting for her dark side to come out was a complete waste. I swirled the golden contents while I thought of Pitch, black-eyed and heart-poundingly alien. I wouldn't say that. She did tie me to a tree. Really? You never mentioned it. So now that you aren't going to marry her, are you set on Stoneborough being the one? Or will you let her marry a different mage, Lester, for instance? I wanted to snarl at him for mentioning Penny and another mage's name in the same sentence, but instead I sighed. Stoneborough is her best option. Won't Pitch be jealous? I sipped and focused on the orange flavor that mixed with something darker, licorice almost. If she is, it will likely be of Zack, not Penny. I shook my head. I had no idea what I was talking about. I still didn't understand Pitch or Sooth, how he could make Penny hurt when I hurt him. But I didn't understand how to make an aberration either. Was Sooth planning to sell Penny to the highest bidder? Was that his purpose in creating her? You could buy continents with an aberration. One like Penny, with that streak of pitch black and no madness. No mage or sorcerer could resist that, being loved. The possibilities of loving, feeling, leaving madness behind and drowning in bliss. I could have had her. I still could. She ached. Still. I rubbed my chest, threw back my tea, and headed out. Where are you going? Bonding with Penny. She's been practicing ballet without you. Apparently she's still performing whether we're married or not. He stood up. I'll make a point of doing my best with her. Perhaps not quite that. We wouldn't want her falling in love with another unavailable, heartless mage.
Blooming Black, Chapter 30. My back ached and nausea swirled through me, compounded by a headache that roared behind my temples. I should have gone to bed early instead of staying in the library until the wee hours, but there was too much I didn't understand about the basic structure of contracts. I felt like if I could get a grasp on it, I could understand my grandmama, and maybe even the natural laws that governed mages like Drake. Lester walked with me, but halfway there he said, "I forgot something at the library," and turned around, hurrying away. I stared after him for a second before I shrugged and continued down the pillared hall, arms full of books that had wanted to come home with me. It was only a few steps later when Drake's hand came around me, his bare chest against my bare back and shoulder, my lower back against his stomach, skin to skin. Something about what happened to my clothes should have passed through my mind, but the relief was so great that all I could do was sob once and sag against him. His arm didn't touch my stomach. There was no contact other than my back and chest. It didn't matter. For an indeterminate amount of time we stayed like that until he finally murmured, "We'll have to do something about the bond. I can't go around accosting you any time my chest gets itchy. Think about what mage you'd like to own you. Zach may be the simplest solution, but I wouldn't want to put all my eggs in one basket. Let me know." He stepped back, the shock of cold air on my bare skin only for a moment before my jacket was back. I didn't turn around. I couldn't try to see him, to follow him. I literally couldn't. I sank down to the floor and put my face on the pile of books. It hurt worse now than it had before. That was the old pain from my accident. This was the kind fed by my brain and its cycle of, "I love him, he loves me, why doesn't he love me? Penny, did you fall?" Lester. What did he want? I raised my head and looked up at him, so far away, stretching up and up and up. I fell. Deeply, desperately, and I don't think I'll ever recover. Is there some way to regrow broken hearts? He smiled, a seductive smile that didn't go with his soft voice. "The spell is called time. Can I help you up?" I'm not sure what was wrong with me, but I put up my arms like I was a toddler who had fallen down and needed to be carried. Lester picked me up in his large arms, his scent pine and old books. Or maybe that was the old books in my lap. I rested my head on his shoulder and ached for Drake with an intensity that shook my soul apart. Lester carried me to Lilac Stories, but left me at the door, giving me a nod while he wiped his palms on his pants like they were sweaty or contaminated with witch. I went inside, and there was Zach, playing video games, loudly yelling at the screen for no reason I could see because he was killing it. I went over and put my chin on the top of his head. "Why did you carve into my hip anyway?" He yelled and threw the controller on the table before he turned sideways and pulled me down on top of him. I didn't beat him black and blue. I just shifted until I was beside him. I grabbed his wrist while my hip pressed against his. "Two-player game. Don't grab me like that or I'll break your face. You look better like that, Peter Pants." He snorted and ruffled my hair before handing me a controller. "You can see me without my glamour any time. Don't call me Peter Pants, though. You're too big to be my Tinkerbell." I elbowed him. Lost Boy. I focused on playing, but my heart hurt so much. I finally got up, dropping the controller as I headed to bed. Zach snagged my wrist, holding me back. His eyes were electric blue. "You should be careful with Lester. You think that he'll rip my protection spell apart twice?" His lips curled. I think that you would enjoy ripping him apart." I cocked my head as I studied him. That's what Ian said to me about Zack, that I might hurt him. Of course. I'll take very good care of all the delicate, innocent, sweet mages who couldn't possibly take care of themselves. You are all so loyal to each other. I twisted my wrist out of his grip and shook my head. Good night, Zack. I couldn't sleep. Everything reminded me of Drake, even Senior Mort, when he nipped my chin. How could I possibly cope without him? I couldn't if he interrupted my intentional distraction to press his chest against my back. I shivered and buried my face into my pillow from the strength of the memory. I could still feel his skin against mine. I shoved the blanket back and got up. I got out herder ingredients, but I ended up lighting my shelf on fire and having to cover it in silvery pink powder. I pulled on my grandmama's lace robe and abandoned my bedroom. It was 3 or 4 in the morning, and the halls were dark and quiet. I found myself in the hall to Drake's room. I skimmed the wall with my fingers as I walked towards his door, skating closer and closer and closer until my hand hovered over his door handle. I pressed my fingertips to the door while I struggled with the ache, the need, the obsession. I let my forehead rest against his door and inhaled deeply, searching for Drake's scent, but I didn't smell Drake. Instead, I smelled other witches, countless females who had been drawn to his door. Had he let them in and smiled at them charmingly until he was bored with them and tossed them away? I stepped away from the door, one step at a time, until I turned and fled. I should have gone back to my room, but instead I went to the parking garage, picked the lock to his green soccer mom car, and slid into the back seat. I curled up on the floor, smelling muddy boots, scratchy rug against my cheek, until I finally fell asleep. An eternity passed like that. After class one day during my ballet practice with Ian, after 3 hours, he said, "Good work. Same time tomorrow." I shook my head. "I'm not finished yet. I need to get that turn leap thing." "Pirouette jet," he said with a golden smile that made me feel uncomfortable. He'd managed to be less charming, more matter-of-fact. He slipped back into that persona, and I didn't mind his hands pulling my shoulders back and lifting my wrist so it was the perfect angle. It's all about the line, Penny Lane. You're drawing lines in the air as you move. It's a matter of geometry and physics. Of course, there is also chemistry, but not the kind you're so very adept at. He glanced at me sideways with the slightest hint of a smile. Why was I so suspicious of his smiles? I wasn't going to fall in love with Ian or any other mage. My heart firmly belonged to Drake. I stopped dancing, standing there frozen while a wave of relief washed over me. The worst had happened. I didn't need to be afraid anymore. I smiled at Ian and walked towards him like I was supposed to, chin up, head tilted, a beautiful garden goddess who owned the stage. He smiled back at me. I retract my statement. You have excellent chemistry with an audience of any kind, Penny Lane. I laughed and spun, leaping with my arms flung backwards like some kind of flamingo, but maybe the pretty kind. I would never fall in love again. I smiled at the people I passed, giving out lollipops randomly. Maybe it wasn't hope that I'd feel better, but hope that it wouldn't get any worse. After studying for hours in the library, I walked back with Lester, and then spent an hour not sleeping before I grabbed my robe and a pillow and blanket, that time to take with me to Drake's car. I slept so well I completely missed my first 3 classes. Zack watched me. On Tuesday, he leaned against the wall in the studio while I danced with Ian, and afterwards, he fell in beside me, grabbing my bag and putting it over his shoulder. "So, after the hospital thing, do you want to go to the same bar or somewhere else?" I winced. "No, I'm not getting drunk, Zack. Me drunk is a bad idea." He slung his arm over my shoulder. "It'll be fun. That's what you need. All this serious studying, dancing, work, isn't healthy, Penny Lane." I pushed his arm off me. Are you kidding? Of course it's healthy. Work is the best thing for depression. Darkly sweet is the only thing that kept me moderately sane after Poppy. I shook my head. Work is what I need. Fine. Work with me on my car or the tech suit. I'll order pizza. I stopped walking. Drake had ordered me pizza on pizza day or something. For a moment I covered my shoulder with my hand, feeling his presence there as though he were right behind me. Zach nudged me hard from the side. No, Chinese then. I shook my head. Chinese food was always part of our Tuesday. We didn't have our Tuesday anymore. No Drake, no Chinese food, no fortune cookies, no fortune cookies, no separate booths. I sighed. I'm not hungry. Don't be an idiot. We'll eat at the bar. They have sandwiches. And peanuts. Or there's a Mexican Indian place. It's terrible. Had to pick glass out of my curry burrito last time. You'd love it. I smiled slightly. It does sound fun. Maybe another time. I was going to hang out with Missy for a long time. I thought we'd watch telenovelas. Maybe have a sleepover. He frowned. You want me to sit in the parking lot all night? No. I want you to go play video games and zone out like you always do. I'll take the bus down. You go do the Cancer Kids thing while I pick up Mexican Indian, and you can eat it with Missy before you do telenovelas. I'll go to the pool hall without you. You're missing out. All those broken chairs, peanut shells on the floor, pool cues. But if you'd rather watch a telenovela with some human, girl, fine, whatever. He drove me in the monstrous beater we really should do something about. The back seat wasn't bad. When we got to the hospital, the little princesses were so glad to see me. I was happy to see that another one had been discharged. Sad that a new girl stared at me from behind the table, nervous. I smiled and knelt on the floor, telling a story about happily ever after with my handsome prince. My chest ached, but slightly less when they climbed over me, tugging on my hair, tying ribbons, pieces of string, and paper in it. When I went down the hall to see Missy, there were guards at the door, mages. I hesitated before I walked up to the man wearing reflective sunglasses at night in a hospital. Excuse me, what's going on? He stared at me for a moment before he pulled out his phone and murmured something about a nosy witch before he gave a brief description of me. He embellished it, adding that the tall witch had yellow hair, no red, goldenish red that maybe looked like molten gold. Apparently, my hair color was an issue. He finally put the phone down and frowned at me. You can't go in today. There's a temporary guest who is extremely dangerous. Wait, this guest is with Missy? He stared at me like a stone statue. I walked past him, but he grabbed my arm, mage hands, unyielding iron. Should I break that grip? Break him? Let go of the witch. Drake's voice was so sweet, so beautiful and melodious. The entire world sang a chorus along with him. I turned to look at him. I'd avoided it for 1,000 years. He was more beautiful than I remembered. How was that possible? He was more alive, more burning, more dark and rippling, like I could see all of his billions of molecules rushing through his skin and nerves, flickering like fire or water, maybe both at the same time. I'm sorry, the man said, letting go of me and bowing at Drake at the same time. Drake didn't look at the man, but kept staring at me, like he'd never seen me before. Had he forgotten what I looked like? He walked towards me and reached out, brushing my hair. His hand came away with a strip of crinkled-up neon paper. What are you doing here? The question was gentle. His eyes were not. It took me a minute to say words. My voice seemed to be lost along with my mind. Telenovelas with Missy. It's Tuesday. No, Szechuan chicken. I shook my head. Zach is bringing Mexican Indian food. It's supposed to be awful. He smiled. That does sound awful. He glanced away and sighed. Missy could use a break. What about the hotel? The three of you? A handful of guards to protect her from Narcolo. That might work. I nodded when he smiled at me, because I didn't seem capable of doing anything else. Perfect. I'll talk to Zach and bring over Missy in a few minutes. A child's scream came from the room, and Drake turned, his attention shifting off me for a moment. I could feel the absence of his gaze, the weight of it. He ran through the white, heavy doors, and I followed close behind, coming out in the room where chaos reigned. The furniture was toppled over, and all the humans were apparently shut in their individual rooms, all except for the one who had raised Lulu. He was behind bars reading a newspaper while a kid, maybe 7, maybe 10, who could tell those things, hit the bars with his fists, screaming at him in a language I really should learn. Darksider. He turned his bright black eyes on Drake, then shifted to me. He lifted his hand, pointed a finger, and cursed me. Of course, nothing happened, but it wouldn't have even if Drake hadn't grabbed me and pulled me behind him. So he took the brunt of the curse. Honestly, I had a protection spell. He'd cast it, so he had to know about it. Why would he protect me instinctively? Maybe it was that he wanted to get cursed. That made some sense, but also made absolutely none. The next time you try to curse my witch, I'll rip you and your army apart. Sit down. The child sat beneath the force of Drake's words, or a spell he cast that I couldn't see. Drake's hand was still on my forearm, his fingers digging into my skin. There would be bruises. I closed my eyes and inhaled deeply. The back of his neck sweet and delicious. Would he mind if I took a tiny nibble? I hadn't had dinner yet. As though he could hear what I was thinking, he let go of my arm and took a step deliberately away from me, towards the kid. The human behind bars cleared his throat. Miss Lane, welcome to the party. This is my son. He doesn't currently have a name, taking a strong dislike to the one I gave him. I inhaled sharply. This little bundle of furious psychosis was the necromancer human's son. Interesting didn't begin to cover it. I shook my head and stepped closer, holding out my hand to the child. It's a pleasure to meet you, sir. I do hope you don't reanimate the corpses here. The humans would be very upset. He drew his eyebrows together before he hesitantly shook my hand. What are you? Are you really a witch? You're too pretty to be a witch. I smiled brightly. I am not a very good witch. I'm a daysider, part human, part darksider, 100% inane. Would you like a lollipop? I have blueberry, black cherry, tiramisu, and pecan crunch. Pippin crunch? Drake asked, one beautiful eyebrow raised. My heart pounded even as I tried not to notice him. New flavor. You wouldn't like it. Of course I wouldn't. I hate lollipops like I detest all inanity, but you know how much I love things I hate. Give me one. I hesitated, then searched in my bag, coming up with a handful that Drake stole from me, tucking it into the inside pocket of his jacket, a jacket that looked black. But there was something about it. An energy. Was that my jacket? I shook my head and dug around for another handful to give to the child. He took them in his shaky fist. Are they poisoned? Oh, good question. No, I don't poison lollipops. Do you want me to lick them first? Drake growled and stepped closer to me. You aren't going to lick anyone's lollipop, Penny Lane. I turned to look at him and inhaled when I saw how close he was. The sparks of green in his dark eyes. Not even mine? Particularly not yours. His gaze fell to my lips and my knees went wobbly. I'll have a lollipop, the human, Carl said in a rational voice that did not belong in my world. I turned and handed him one absently. The child was already devouring all of his, tasting one and then another, then back to the first, and crunching it up like he was starving. That's when Zach arrived with the Indian Mexican. He sat up at a table like seeing the little monster in rags wasn't anything new. He nodded at the human necromancer behind bars and asked Drake, "Are you staying to eat?" "It's terrible." With that high recommendation, how could anyone refuse? Drake glanced at me, then at the child. "Penny shouldn't be here." Zach scoffed. "Penny's perfectly safe. There's nothing he could do to hurt her worse than we already have." "What about the human, Missy?" "She'll be in her room." Zach nodded. "Here, take her plate, Penny." "Which room, Drake?" Drake told me a number, and I took the styrofoam plate from Zach filled with a pink sauce over chicken and rice. I sniffed it. Didn't smell terrible. I went to Missy's door, knocking while my heart pounded from Drake being so close. My arm still throbbed from him touching me. She peered out and blinked at me. "Oh, I didn't expect you." I held up the plate. I should have called. "Do you have a phone? I brought dinner. Mexican Indian from in town. I'm pretty sure it wasn't made by any witches. Also, can we hang out in your room and maybe watch stuff all night? I mean, if you're tired, I get it. But I thought it would be fun to have a slumber party." She stared at me with her one gray eye before she slowly nodded and gave me a slight smile. "All right. That sounds fun. I have an extra pair of pajamas." "Nice. Okay. I'll be there in a few minutes." She nodded again and closed the door, taking the food out of my hands like she trusted me not to poison her or feed her morsels. I turned around and met Drake's eyes. Was he watching to see Missy's reaction to the dark side visitor? "So, sir, you're here visiting your father. Were you brought up in dark side?" My mother was. She preferred it to dayside, even though she was a daysider. I sat down at the table and smiled at Zach when he checked my food for poison. The curry burrito was seriously weird. Sweet and spicy, savory and messy at the same time. The boy nodded. "He's my dad, but he's not human." "How can a necromancer master be human?" "I ran away from home when my mother tried to feed me to him." I blinked at him, and Zach put a bite of the pink chicken in my open mouth. Zach nodded at the kid. "Makes sense. I ran away from home when my mother skinned my cat and put it into a soup." I gasped and covered my mouth, suddenly feeling nauseous. Why would she do that? "That's horrible." He raised his eyebrows at me. "Witches are crazy. Everyone knows that." "Don't tell me that your mother never tried to eat you." I wrinkled my nose at him. "Of course not. My mother didn't even try to eat Poppy, and she was... my cat." I glanced at Drake and then away. I couldn't remember what he knew about Poppy. Every time I looked at him, he was staring at me with those eyes. Dark and fathomless, hungry. "So your mother took in strays instead of eating them? Interesting. How long are you staying in Dayside, Necromancer?" Zach asked the kid. He ate steadily for a long time, before he lifted his pink sauced face. "I can't step through side yet. I'm stuck until the mage lets me go." He jerked a thumb in Drake's direction. Drake said, "Do you want to return to Darkside so soon? Maybe you should enjoy your visit here, eating regular meals, wearing actual clothes, and, of course, learning an assortment of spells that will keep you alive." He glared at Drake. "You want me to stay in this place?" Drake hesitated. This wasn't a place for feral Darkside children, not with the vulnerable humans. There's a school for children your age. "A few schools. I could sponsor you." Zach elbowed Drake. "You're broke. I'll sponsor him. Do you have any interest in tech?" The child stared at Zach for a long time before soberly shaking his head. "No. Are you a tech mage?" Zack nodded and pulled out a little gizmo that he flipped into the air. It let off some sparks. A bright flash of light then went dark in his hand. I am. He frowned and looked from Zack to Drake. But I know you. You're the green mage. Drake shrugged. He wasn't looking particularly green at that moment, not with his red hair all mussed and deliciously waving over his perfect skull. He had a beautiful skull. I have been called that, yes. The child turned his eyes on me. You're the one he wants. I've never seen hair like that. Is it real? It is. The room was quiet for a few moments, while I struggled with to say to that compliment. Who wants me? He took a big bite of curry burrito. Sooth. I worked for him before the mage took me away. Why does he want you so much? Maybe he wants to eat you. I stood up while my stomach churned and body trembled. Maybe. It was so nice to meet you. I hope you figure things out soon. I went to Missy's room, glad when she locked the door behind me, the lock sparking magic barriers that should keep even a mage out. I sank down on the gray chair, feeling torn apart. Drake. He was there on the other side of the door, talking and laughing like nothing had changed. Like everything hadn't been ripped apart. Are you okay? I nodded. Turn on something sad, Missy. I'm going to cry and I want to blame it on the movie.
Blooming Black, Chapter 31. Seeing Penny was like being dipped in a pleasant bath of nitric acid. All of my nerves awoke, aching for a brush against her skin. Her hair, any fleeting part of her that I could grasp. I leaned back on the chair, ankles crossed on the table as I ran the strip of paper I'd stolen from her curls through my fingers. Are you lovesick? The baby mage asked. I glanced at him. What do you know about lovesick mages? The baby mage shrugged and glanced at the human behind bars who studiously kept his attention on his newspaper. He'd been reading all the back issues since the day he'd been taken to Darkside. He was catching up on world events the old-fashioned way that he understood. I know about lovesick sorceresses. He started aging, and she started losing her mind with worry, feeding him bits of herself to keep him alive. Maybe I should have let her have me. It would have made her happy, but now she's dead. The necromancer's pet, Carl, folded his newspaper and cleared his throat. Sebastian, you did the right. Sebastian snarled at his father. What does that mean? The right thing? You say that as though you didn't betray her love. It isn't love when it is harmful. It's something else, something worse than hate. Darksiders are right to fear what they know as love. It destroys more than anything else. Sebastian glared at his plate. She gave up everything for you. She did not. I gave up everything. Her choice to use you to save me was the final outrage. It is a parent's duty to protect their children above all else. She would sacrifice my freedom, your life. But what did she ever risk? Did she leave Darkside? Leave her world to raise you in Dayside, where you would have a chance at fulfilling your potential? Did she ever offer me freedom? I was her slave, and you were her slave's child, both of us disposable. Yes, I killed her. It's a tragedy to be free and miss the chains, but love breaks us. Zack sighed. I second that. I fell in love with a witch. It almost killed me. I nodded at the memory of Zack dangling from the Christmas tree, trying to hang himself to death. What a stupid way to try to kill yourself. Love makes you very stupid, but sometimes it also makes you strong. Zack stared at me. If you can't protect her, you're right to give her up. I rubbed my chest. I ached for her so close behind that closed door. I could get through it in spite of the spell. Right. I agree, Sebastian, right hurts. I stayed there with Zack through the night. I couldn't leave Missy and Penny alone with a dozen mages and Zack to protect them from one baby Daysider. Drake, Zack said, when the lights were dim and Sebastian was curled up asleep on the couch. Mem, are you going this year? I knew what he was talking about. Nothing else happened this time of year. March, the waters of March, other than my mother's annual memorial. My father would be there. My real one. I liked Sooth better than him. Maybe. Zack sighed. You should go. Take a break. She's been working so hard to avoid you. Every time she sees you, she falls apart. The thing that worries me is that she's not coming to me to be put back together. She's withdrawing mostly. She lets Lester study with her as long as he doesn't bother her too much. I thought she'd be in my bed weeping and getting drunk every night. I got a lot of really good alcohol and snacks, but she's not turning to me. I don't know if she'll marry anyone else. I don't know if she can. I closed my eyes while raging happiness swept through me like flame, but it left behind only ashes. She loved me, but she had to marry a mage before her 18th birthday so that he could protect her after her mother's spells lost their strength. She'll marry another mage. She almost married Lester. She might find another mage like that, someone random, unexpected, unexplainable. That's fine as long as she's safe. He gripped my wrist, blue eyes burning. It's not fine. She belongs to us. No other mage will touch her. I pried his grip off me. Her safety is much more important than anything else. Pitch's safety, we're her guardians, however much it hurts. And it hurt. Being master over a bunch of Darksiders wasn't exactly pleasant either. They seemed to think that gave them license to fight with whoever they wanted to fight with. Business was a mess. For some reason, Darksiders were reluctant to renew contracts with an army that couldn't seem to help fighting on the wrong side. It was cleanup, everything going backwards, trying to unwin battles fought, restore domains dismantled, and the cost was high at a time when dayside business was in shambles. In other words, I had time for neither mooning over a girl or taking a trip to mourn my mother. At the same time, I needed some information from my father. He would know more about the Huntsman protective mantle, what I could expect from it. I spent a week not touching Penny, focusing on work and studies, only taking a few moments away to watch Penny dance with Ian. He knew how to bring out the absolute best in his partner, and she shone. I growled and stalked down the hall, glancing at Lester as I passed. He'd made a habit of taking up her evenings, not in any overt way, but still he was there, solid and devious. Lester. I'm sure Zack has threatened you enough. I'm curious, though. You have no intention of taking a witch. Why the interest in Penny? Having an ally appeals to me. I raised an eyebrow skeptically. Nothing to do with her rabbit lingerie. His eyes glinted. To me, she represents possibilities. I frowned at him. That's what Mitch said. Indeed, the infinite possibilities of madness that Penny represents. Be cautious, Lester. If she could get under my skin, it's possible for her to get underneath yours, and you have so much more skin than I do. I stalked away from Lester, jealous of the nights he spent beside Penny, inhaling her, hearing her breathe, seeing her face buried beneath the gloriously tangled curls. I needed distance perspective. I needed to see the face of a mage who let love ruin his own life and every other life around him. 2 days later, in the wee hours of the morning, I got into my dark green sous vide. It smelled like her. It felt like she was close, so close that I could have heard her heartbeat if I listened hard enough. I turned the radio on loudly, cranking the volume on a classic piano concert that Penny would never listen to. She was the least musical person I'd ever met. She had no idea what class and culture looked like. How could I love a witch like that? How could I help it? I drove 2 hours to the airport where Stoneborough kept their experimental jets. If I were going to bother flying somewhere, I would make it useful. I parked on the side of the enormous airfield after passing through their security checks. I'd let them know I was coming. The jet should be all ready to give me a demonstration of what it could do. Stoneborough hadn't altered its behavior towards Huntsman, unlike several other families who had cancelled contracts and renegotiated deals as soon as they smelled blood in the water. I didn't take it personally. That's what I would have done. I climbed the ladder, walked into the roomy interior, and settled down with my laptop. I had business to do. Before we took off, I thought I heard something, a thumping in the cargo hold, but that was probably the crew loading up the plane. The island destination wasn't anything you could step through side to get to. It was protected with barriers like Penny's mother's house. Penny. I gritted my teeth and focused on the merger that might not happen. Finally, the engines roared to life, and after a few more minutes, the jet started circling, getting into position on the runway. A few minutes later, I heard another thud. Was there an animal in the cargo? I pushed the little blue button with the Stoneborough crest engraved on it. A charming human came out of the front. She'd come earlier asking if I needed a drink, and I'd been very specific about wanting no company. "Excuse me, is there live cargo on this plane?" "Other than us?" she asked with a blinding smile. She reminded me a little bit of Penny Lane, saying something inane just to irritate someone. "That's right, other than us." She blinked her heavily masquerade eyes at me. "I'll check." She went back towards the cockpit. I sighed and closed my laptop. I should have taken care of it myself in the first place. Perhaps it was a wicked Cree catching a ride. I got up and pressed a code into the keypad until the door swept open to the cargo area. It was drafty and dark until the lights automatically blinked on, and there on the metal floor was a pile of red gold hair. I stared at the quivering mass of the most valuable gold in the world until she jerked and hit her head on the floor. That was the sound I'd heard. The curse must not like her flying in planes very much. How did she get here? Where was Zack? How could she possibly follow me when I was giving her space so nobly and out of the abysmally small goodness of my heart? I walked over to her, letting my boots hit the floor heavily. I stood beside the pile of convulsing glory. "How are things?" I finally asked. She raised up enough I could see her pale face and enormous eyes before everything tightened up, and she disappeared beneath the avalanche of hair. "Are you a stowaway, or are you taking your position as Stoneborough employee too seriously?" She whimpered. "Go away." "It's been a while since we bonded. I suppose now is as good a time as any." I picked her up, careful not to pull her hair, holding her against my chest while she curled up, wearing her lace robe and something silky and pink polka-dotted beneath. She had no shoes. She wrapped her arms around me and buried her face in my neck. Her lips were soft, her cheekbone hard, her eyelashes the sweetest butterfly brushes. I carried her into the main compartment where I could sit down on the couch, holding her on my lap, inhaling her, touching her as I'd ached to do for an eternity. She trembled in my arms, but didn't look at me for the rest of the flight. It was too short. When we landed, when the irritating flight attendant came out to talk about seatbelt safety, she pushed away from me and stumbled across the corridor to the ladder. She would have fallen down if I hadn't grabbed her around the waist and pulled her against me. She elbowed me in the ribs, but I ignored it as I walked slowly, holding her carefully but very firmly. She couldn't just stow away on my plane and then leave the moment we landed. She was mine, and I wasn't ever going to let her go again. When we reached the tarmac, she slipped out of my arms and hit the ground, pressing her cheek and palms against it. I stood there, clenching and unclenching my fists, watching her worship solid ground instead of me. How had she gotten away from me? I'd been holding her too carefully so I wouldn't hurt her internal organs beneath where her ribs had been. I glanced out over the wide stretch of runway, the wind rustling my hair across my forehead irritatingly. This wasn't a pleasure trip, and Penny was what I'd been trying to leave behind. If she didn't want to stay in my arms, she shouldn't have followed me. "So, this is fun. Penny Lane, do you want to tell me what you're doing here?" She raised her head slowly, eyes enormous, pink lips trembling. She was so deliciously mussed and rumpled, her lace robe falling off of her shoulder and revealing the silky pale skin with a narrow pink polka dot strap. "No, also I think I'm going to puke." She did. On my shoes, I snapped my fingers, and green sparks ate away everything. She would be starving after this. She must be tired as well. It had been a long flight, and she'd been trembling and clinging the entire time. That took energy. I'd been trying not to cling, which was equally exhausting and twice as irritating. "Charming. I can't begin to understand why I didn't propose to you sooner. Are you finished?" She looked up at me, horror, embarrassment, self-loathing all clearly evident in her eyes before she peeled herself off the pavement and staggered away. I followed, impatience and anger building with every step. Where did she think she was going? She stopped at the edge of the pavement, staring at the ocean beyond the 6-foot scrap of brush. "Where are we?" she whispered. "An island paradise, at least it was until you arrived. Did you have a reason for stowing away on my jet?" She frowned at me, eyes growing dark in spite of her trembling. Maybe she'd hurt me. I'd enjoy that so much. "Your jet?" She raised her shaky hand to point at the jet, that insignias carved into my hip. "Not my shoulder. That's Zack's, not yours. I have as much right to be in a Stoneborough airplane as you do." I nodded. pressing my lips together because all the things I wanted to say were apologies and accusations. I wasn't allowed to be attached to her. I pulled out my phone and called Zach. "How did you like it?" he asked as soon as he answered. "Where's Penny Lane?" "She stayed in her room all day." "Why?" "A witch who looks exactly like Penny Lane in a lace robe just threw up on my shoes." It was quiet for a second. "You took Penny with you? Why would you do that?" Penny grabbed my phone away from me and turned, taking 2 steps away. "Zach, can you come and get me? Maybe bring a boat or a submarine? I don't know. I'm not sure if I can ever do a jet again." "Hold on." She turned and threw up again, bending down, her hair swinging forward into the mess. Not catching her hair was the hardest thing I'd ever done. "So," she whispered in a raspy voice before she plopped down on the pavement, pale and perspiring. "Can you come?" She frowned before she finally held my phone out to me. I gave her a tight smile and took it. How dare she take my phone and then not say thank you or anything else to me? "How did you let this happen?" Zach roared. "You took Penny Lane on an international flight without any protection, no backup, no plan, just you being a complete—" I held the phone away from my ear and listened to the waves crash, the wind whisper, Zach's voice a vaguely annoying distant buzz until I couldn't hear it anymore, and I brought the phone back to my ear. "Yes, it is irritating." "I agree," I said, glancing pointedly at Penny. She didn't notice because her head was hanging between her knees while she panted, still clearly feeling the effects of the curse. Apparently she's been stealth-stalking me. I didn't even realize she wasn't avoiding me until I found her convulsing in the cargo bay. It's a very nice cargo area. I particularly like the lead floor lights. "Fine. If you really want me to think that you can drive for 2 hours with Penny Lane in your car and not notice, fine. Of course you didn't want to take her to an island paradise in her grandmama's lace robe to finish what you started." "That's an idea. That hadn't occurred to me, but you're right. It would be a waste." Penny shuddered. "What's wrong with me? This is as bad as after a tourney. Send the coordinates to Paris and I'll be there in 6 hours. I hesitated as I stared at Penny. I can't do that. This plane and pilot could return here, but no one who wasn't carrying a huntsman could find it, not even Paris. I'll bring her back when I'm done here. She isn't yours, Drake. Try to remember that. I'll be there tomorrow." I curled my lips and hung up. I tucked the phone back into my pocket and swaggered over to Penny Lane. I dropped onto my heels, then pushed her hair out of her face so I could examine her. "You look terrible. I should leave you here until I'm ready to return." "That's fine with me." Her furious voice matched the darkness in her eyes. Her darkness was so beautiful. Did she have any idea? I snapped my fingers, dissolving the mess and leaving sparks that made her blink and flinch. Zach specifically asked me not to. "It's almost like he wants you to think that he cares. We both know it's impossible for a mage to actually care about you. You should be careful with him. As an aberration, she was exactly what any mage could care about. She smiled a sudden sweet smile that made my heart pound. "It's okay. I'm never going to fall for another mage. I should probably thank you for breaking my heart, getting it over with. It's a huge relief." I smiled back at her and offered my hand. "I'm so delighted to be of service. Come on, Penny Lane. Walking might help. Perhaps the brisk sea breeze will as well." She stood but didn't take my hand. Instead, she crossed her arms and walked with determination in the wrong direction. I cleared my throat. "That's the way to Rosewood. The house is actually behind me." She stopped walking, hands in tight fists before she whirled around and stalked past me in the other direction. She stopped to throw up twice before we'd left the tarmac. She was seriously sick. I tapped my fingers on my pants before I began to mutter under my breath, the spell that would take the edge off her curse. I gave her a few more instructions, but I let her lead the way. That way I could watch her walk, the sway of her hips, the way her hair caught the sunshine, her beautiful ankles and bare feet. We left the airstrip and took a small trail through the thick undergrowth towards my mother's beach house mausoleum.
Blooming Black, Chapter 32. "Why did you take off for an island holiday in the middle of a school week?" I asked, glancing over my shoulder at him. He gestured with one perfectly formed hand. It's family business. Family or business? My family is a business. Didn't we already cover this topic exhaustively? I winced. Yes, we'd had that conversation back in my dismal garret a world away from this lush, tropical paradise, the water crashing and beckoning, as alive and compelling as the mage I'd accidentally stalked. I stepped carefully over the thick roots that lay across the path. Does it? You haven't had a lot of business meetings? I stopped walking and turned around, arms crossed over my chest to keep from accidentally caressing or killing him. I kept my chin up even though my stomach tied itself in knots. If you're done playing with me, does that include Darkly Sweet? How can we have a business meeting without Senior Mort and Professor Cadaver? My heart pounded. Talking to him like this was so difficult. Is that a no? He glanced away from me, staring at the ocean before he gave me an indifferent shrug. Your business is safe from me. I haven't touched it and don't intend to. You can go back to being a small, insignificant brand with no money but an excess of soul. Anything else. I pressed my lips together to keep the words back. Angry, weak, pleading words that would only irritate him. I walked without saying anything else for a long time. I didn't comment on the lush greenery or the flowers that dripped from trees. When we got to the bridge over the stream, I paused and gripped the railing as I stared at the waterfall. I could see a rainbow in the spray as it hung, dazzling around the rocks. I'd always thought that pictures like that weren't real. I shook my head and continued on. What was I doing there? I'd been sleeping in his car when he climbed in. I'd thought I could just stay there while he went to town and back, but the trip was long enough I wouldn't be able to walk back on my own. Then, at the airfield, I'd seen him walking, seen the jet, and couldn't help myself. Yes. I'd crept into the cargo hold because I wanted to see Drake. I hadn't meant to get stuck there when the men loading the cargo closed it up. Idiotic of me, but I'd never been to an airport, much less on any kind of plane. He must think I was the most pathetic creature in the world. He must be so glad he hadn't married me. Still, it's beautiful here, I admitted in a soft voice he shouldn't have heard. Yes, the view is almost worth the flight. His voice wasn't quiet or gentle. He sounded irritated. He grabbed my arm and swung me around. His eyes narrowed as he studied me, critically taking in my pasty skin and pale lips. I was probably going to throw up again. His lip curled. Don't get excited, Penny Lane. I just realized that you need sunscreen. If you'd rather burn and I heal you later, I suppose that's an option. I bit my lip and closed my eyes. I waited, pathetically enjoying his hand on my arm, that contact that made me thrum and ache at the same time. It seemed to take a very long time. Are you done? I opened my eyes and saw his magic dance along my skin, green sparks sliding over my flesh, a dance that smelled like black cherry. I pulled away and started walking. Why would he smell like that? Even if only for a moment. Such an impatient witch. As though witches were supposed to be virtuous. It's peculiar. You claim to be in love with me, but you aren't staring at me rapturously. Clearly, you're still stalking me or you wouldn't be here, but you do it so terribly. I'm not stalking you. No, I wasn't a virtuous anything, but I'd tried so hard not to stalk him. Surely that counted for something. Then what were you doing in my car? I hesitated before marching even faster. I stepped on a hard rock and limped, muttering candies under my breath. It's none of your business. I beg your pardon. I forgot for a moment that my car wasn't any of my concern. How idiotic of me to have such a lapse in mental acuity. I glared at him. My foot hurt. I was going to throw up 1,000,000 times even though my stomach was empty, and I'd tried so hard to not be just another pathetic girl in love with Drake Huntsman. I sleep better there. It has nothing to do with stalking you. We both know that I could break into your room and sleep in your bed any time I wanted. The scent of black cherry was unmistakable and more delicious than ever. You've been sleeping in my car regularly. I'm going to have to start charging you rent. Should it be nightly or hourly? Which would make me more money? I have to be very careful with money these days, business being what it is. Business. Of course. I turned, continuing my march away from him. Even if he felt vague desire for me from time to time, it wasn't anything serious. It didn't mean anything. Are you going to marry a witch for money? That's an idea. Do you have any recommendations? Marrying for money is about as heartless as marrying to stay in a will. Now I'm heartless. Macaroons and bonbons. You're annoying. Can't you just stop talking? How far is it to the house, and how long will it take for Zach to get here? What's with the sweets thing? Is that how your mother talks? Sweets is to remind me not to kill people. I'm a macaroon, not a pitch. Sometimes it's hard to remember. Ah, so you want to kill me? That's good. I whirled around. The green in his eyes bright, hungry. How is that good? You don't know good because you're a mage, but me, I understand good because I don't have magic. It isn't good to kill people out of anger or hurt. It's not good to kill anyone in anything other than defense of either yourself or someone you love. Me killing you would be the opposite of good. He took a step towards me, and for a moment I thought his gaze dropped to my mouth. Opposite of good? Would that be bad? I'm a bit new to this whole concept, but it is fascinating to be taught about morality by someone who has no problem with theft or prevarication. I suppose it's all a matter of perspective. But then it wouldn't be called morality, but preference. I jabbed his chest, feeling the bond beneath his clothing, beneath the glamour. He belonged to me. He was mine. He would think I'm a liar? He caught my finger and held it, tight enough that I couldn't get away, but gentle enough not to bruise me. You lie to cover up pitch. You lie to catch yourself a husband. You lie to catch yourself a husband. You lie when you look at me and tell me that you aren't stalking me. You're assuming that I have something against liars. I adore prevarication. There's an art to it, layering on meanings that have just the right tint of misdirection. A well-told lie is a beautiful thing. The scent of black cherry was everywhere, so sweet and burning. Ashes and a hint of blood, dragon and ocean, salt and tears. Why didn't you tell me that you loved me? I shouldn't have said that. My heart pounded while I ached for the mage that didn't love me, didn't want me, but had to deal with me. Because I'd been stupid enough to follow him onto a jet. He raised his perfectly formed eyebrows. Would that be a good lie? I suppose I didn't think of it. That wasn't the game. The game was making you love me even though you knew that I never loved you. It was a good game. A pity it ended so abruptly. My heart broke all over again. I whirled around and he let go of my hand. The rest of the walk was a blur. A million picture-perfect scenes that blended into one throbbing heartache. I should have stayed at the island airport in spite of the men who had looked at me, at what I'd been wearing in a way that made my skin crawl. I needed more serious pajamas. I needed one of those nice, thick flannel robes that stayed closed. I pulled my robe up again, holding together the fronts to keep them in place. We walked in silence until we reached the stretch of white sand at the base of the craggy rocks. An enormous house that looked like a glass and metal sculpture perched above us at the end of the long white beach. I'd never seen so much sand. It felt so nice under my toes. I kicked it up, enjoying the sensation in spite of myself. The stupid motion sickness had almost worn off. Drake said, "You should come back down here after you get changed. Put on some real sunscreen and a swimming suit. You should relax until Zack comes to rescue you. The curse seems worse this time. I kicked the sand a little harder. Why do you always call it a curse? What else could it be? I shook my head. How am I supposed to relax? You're right. It's never been so bad, and I'm not sure. I shivered at the thought of climbing back on that jet. The engine screaming and my whole body trying to shake itself apart. It's not like you don't know how pathetic I am. I really don't want to do that again. His voice was cool, matter of fact. It would take a week to get back by boat. A week being vulnerable to attack by creek or whatever else. I doubt Revere would advise that. You should call him. I glared at him. I don't have my phone. Do you have his number? I have exactly what I'm wearing. He smiled demurely. You don't have his number memorized? Poor Penny. At the mercy of the merciless. It's a good thing Zack considers you something of a curiosity. He's warned me that I must not seduce you however tempted I am. I gasped, and the scent of black cherries grew stronger. Why would you want to seduce me? He rolled his eyes and walked languidly over the sand. I'm going to have so much sand in my shoes. I hate sand in my shoes. We're in a tropical paradise. Can't you taste seduction in the air? Luckily for both of you, I'll be so busy trying not to kill my father that I won't have the slightest extra energy for anything else. Meeting his father would be fun. So much fun. Macaroons and bonbons, what had I been thinking? You don't climb into a jet and think that the ride won't last long. Even if you distinctly hear Drake talking to the pilot about taking a test drive. Drake was used to flying, though. He had a dragon. What's it like riding a dragon? He gave me a sharp glance. Where did that come from? I've been keeping Jell-O under my toe fat for a long time. Jell-O? He almost gave me a real smile as he nodded. My dragon's name is Jell-O. He likes you. I chewed on my bottom lip. He's beautiful. And soft. I wish I'd gotten to see him longer. Drake shrugged. He sort of wants to eat you. It's probably for the best if you keep your distance. I turned away from him, looking at the view instead. It was breathtaking. So why did I keep wanting to look at him? This whole place is beautiful, I admitted, gesturing to the ocean, the sand and him accidentally. It's called an island paradise. That's the thing about paradise. People without souls find it less enchanting. Who wants to go to heaven when you're always burning? Did he have pain in his soul? Yes, he did. But he was closed to me completely. Maybe he always had been. Maybe he always had been. Maybe it had just been a very well-performed play for him. It had been a very good game. I walked slower and slower the closer we got to the house that overhung the cliffs, so it was directly over the ocean. The beach grew narrow until we reached the steps. I didn't think this through, I muttered. Sleeping in my car or stalking me onto the jet? I can't stay in a house with you. It hurts to look at you. I can't stay here for a whole day waiting for Zack. I'll go back to the airplane. I'll sleep on the beach or in a palm tree or something. That's when another mage spoke. You're just in time for lunch. I turned towards the mage, who seemed to be Revere's age, but he wasn't wearing a shirt. He was so tan and strong with a dark red mustache that matched his auburn hair. It glinted in the sun like black cherry jelly. Drake pulled off his jacket, peeled off his shirt, and threw it at the other mage. Tracked. It's customary to wear clothing in front of guests. I stared at Drake. His pale skin smooth and perfect, strong and lean. He needed sunscreen or he'd burn to a crisp beneath that bright, hot sun. I took a step closer to Drake in spite of myself. That's when Drake stepped between me and the mage, crossing his arms like he was protecting me from the stranger. The other mage seemed amused, but it was hard to tell the way Drake kept moving, muscles in his back and arms flexing as though he were ready for a tourney fight. Was he always so aggressive? So beautiful. The other mage spoke again. Is it? Apparently, I've been away from civilization for too long. Too much of my current socialization is al fresco. The dolphins and the guppies aren't very accommodating when I try to dress them up. Do you do that? I asked, moving to the side of me to stare at the stranger. I imagine it would be difficult with most sea life, but dolphins are so sweet. I don't imagine they'd mind a top hat and a bow tie any more than a rat or a robin. He narrowed his eyes at me. Oh, he'd been joking. Sometimes it was so hard to tell. I should just keep my mouth shut. Drake spoke, his voice hard. Penny Lane, meet my father. He's completely debauched, so he'll probably try to seduce you out of your robe. Not that your robe isn't always trying to fall off. It's a good thing that you're so obsessed with me that you can't possibly look at any other mage. She's my most persistent stalker. He informed his father as he started up the steps. That mage was Drake's father? I suppose that explained the dark red hair and the green eyes. And now he knew that I shamelessly stalked Drake. Wonderful. Maybe no one could tell I was blushing because it would look like a sunburn. I followed Drake, his bare back singing to me while the scent of black, cherry, and ashes drifted all around. At the top of the steps was a wide patio with red bougainvillea climbing over the stone wall, guarding the drop to the beach. It was so ridiculously beautiful I was starting to get irritated. It made Rosewood look like a tacky McMansion. I hesitated on that deck, glancing from Drake and his bare chest to his father. Drake sighed and rolled his eyes before turning to face his father with a stiff smile. I should have been more clear. Penny was working on the jet that I stole. When I say working, I mean sleeping on the job in cargo. She's not stalking me. She's actually Zachary Stoneborough's girlfriend and ally. She's very smart. I know she doesn't look like it, but she can really do things to an electrical box. I promised her that I'd find some of my dear aunt's clothing for her to wear. We still have some of her things in the second guest room. Right? He turned to speak to me. It overlooks the island instead of the beach. Do you mind not having an ocean view? Zach's coming tomorrow. He can have the room next to you, unless you'd rather share. My father doesn't care. I glanced from Drake to his dad, then back at him. I couldn't tell whether or not the auburn-haired mage with a mustache cared or not. For some reason, my chest ached in a strange way when I looked at the older mage. Didn't you say that there was a hotel? I'd love to borrow your aunt's clothes, but I don't need to stay here. His father clapped me on the shoulder and gave me a welcoming smile that didn't touch his eyes. Stoneborough is like family. If Drake stole a jet, giving you a bed is the least he can do. He took his hand off before I ripped it out of his wrist. He glanced at Drake. Why don't you show this lovely girl to her room before we have our ritualistic greeting? Drake smiled mockingly and walked inside the house, shadowed and cool after the bright warmth of the deck. The blinds of the floor-length glass windows and doors were all closed, making the house feel like a sepulchre. Kitchen, living room through there, and then up this staircase is your room. The door is turquoise. Every door is a different color, so you shouldn't get lost. He pointed up the staircase that was like the curve of a shell. It was of pale stone with pale pink in the shadows. And bathrooms? I didn't meet his eye, instead looking around at the ridiculously luxurious beach house that had apparently been abandoned. Every room has its own toilet. We also have extra toothbrushes. You'd think you'd never been to an island paradise before. I'd say you should take your time, but you're probably starving. Come to the kitchen after you find something a little less comfortable to wear. I frowned at him, but went up the curving stairs 2 at a time. I was halfway up when I realized why seeing Drake's father made my heart hurt. In 20 years, Drake would look like that, but I wouldn't get to watch him grow older. live a life with him so I knew where every wrinkle came from and could place every scar. I'd seen Drake's future, but I wouldn't be in it.
Blooming Black, Chapter 33. My father was already in the kitchen when I went in. First of all, when you're about to lie, make certain the object that you claim belongs to someone else isn't visibly wearing your initials. Secondly, your laptop and bag are in your room. Bernie or Henry, someone from the airport, brought them over when you decided to walk. Third, she's lovely. You shouldn't play with a witch like that. I had his throat in my claws, the world growing greener every moment as I crushed him, bowing him back against the counter while I struggled against the rage. I closed my eyes and counted to 53 times before I could retract my claws and step away from my father. I should have known the first time I didn't physically assault him that Sooth wasn't my father. As uncontrolled as always, he said, fingering his throat until the blood disappeared and the skin smoothed over. I shrugged and went to the fridge and started taking out ingredients, mindlessly chopping and sautéing while my father worked beside me. We didn't talk. Talking never helped. He was right, though. She was lovely, and I needed to be careful so that I didn't bring her down in a burning flame with me. Shouldn't she be down by now? I glared at my knife and turned, throwing it into the knife holder. I only used a tiny bit of magic to get it in the slot before I turned and went to the stairs. What was I doing? She could take her time if she wanted, but I needed to see her. I stared at the girl laying on the bed in a towel, curled up on her side, little pink toes, nails painted pale gold. The polish was badly chipped. She must have painted them for the wedding. She slept, her face relaxed, soft, sweet. I stared at her for a long time before I went back downstairs. My father had laid out lunch on the patio. I took her setting back inside before I came back out and sat, staring at the ocean as we ate in silence. My father cleared his throat. What is she doing? Sleeping. She had a difficult trip. You look a bit ragged yourself. Did I? I wonder if Penny noticed. I shrugged. I spend nights dealing with Darkside, days dealing with Huntsman ink. You could say I'm burning the candle at both ends. He smoothed his mustache. No one had mustaches anymore. Didn't he know that? Dealing with Darkside. I thought you enjoyed your forays into the darkness. I smiled pleasantly. You can think what you like. How has the weather been? Any sudden gales? I was caught in a hurricane not a week ago. My ship is down at the dock. I floated in the ocean for 4 days. Why? He shrugged and stretched his hands above his head, my shirt tugging at his shoulders. He had more muscle than I did. My mother had always been tall and slender. While I was there, just me and the ocean, stars above, I heard the strangest thing. An emu. He gave me a sharp glance. An oath. In Darksider, swearing fealty to Huntsman. I wrinkled my nose. That was a mistake. We had to redo that one. So much blood. He leaned over the table, eyes dark and hard. You're swearing Huntsman mercenaries to you. I shrugged. Do you know, I liked him better. I hate him, but I like him better. I must have known he wasn't you. I wouldn't have talked to you like that. A deception sorcerer took my place. He glanced back out over the ocean. That shouldn't be possible. I'm sure you're dealing with it. You have Jasper. I laughed. Oh, I do. I mean, I don't. But I did, which is why we have this mess. Thank you for giving me Jasper. I adore the mage, but you could have done a background check on him. Jasper was the chink. Of course. Brilliant. He is. The deception sorcerer is absolutely brilliant. I have his pinky on my coffee table. You didn't kill him when you had the chance. Odd. You used to enjoy ripping mages apart. I still enjoy it, but I've learned a little more control. I've only destroyed one. 2. Oh, there was the tourney, well, less than most years. The tourney didn't count. Teddy kissed Penny. I had to inflict pain on the world. Also, I'd betrayed Penny, and now I'd done it again. Because my father was off playing on a boat. Spending my nights taking oaths of fealty from Darksiders wasn't quite as good stress relief as killing things. And the girl? What girl? Oh, Penny. She's got excellent legs, don't you think? I didn't notice. I did notice her shoulder. I fiddled with my fork. not stabbing my father with it. So, usually you don't write into someone like that unless you intend to keep them. That was my intention. I stared at the sea, the waves cresting and falling, the distant roar a constant that helped keep me from ripping the world apart. He sighed. You gave the bond to Zachary. Let fear control you. I turned and smiled at him. He was so tan. Would I tan so well if I spent years on a boat or just burn over and over like Sooth? It's called responsibility. You could give it a try sometime. I don't recommend it. There's nothing pleasant about it, but someone needs to do it. I stood and gathered up my dishes. If you have anything relevant to tell me about Huntsman's protection shields, I'd try not to kill you while you shared. If Penny asks, I'll be on the beach getting tan. Also, if you touch her again, I'll rip you apart. Again, you grabbed her shoulder. I don't care what you were trying to gauge. I have no intention of touching anyone's witch, particularly one belonging to an ally like Stoneborough. Are you certain she belongs to him? And not... I growled, low, deep smoke curling from my nostrils. I could feel fangs shifting in my mouth, aching to rip off his head. I licked my lips and turned. I have officially relinquished claim of her. All the same, you should be very careful how you refer to her. I understand. As lovely as she is, how could you watch her descent into madness? I stiffened. Penny wouldn't ever go insane, wouldn't ever rip anything apart without whole soul. I would happily watch her descend into anything, but I'm not what she needs right now. I left him there, my heart heavy with aching. Zach came, dropping out of the sky in a spray of sand when he hit the beach. He walked towards me, his metal suit folding up until it was all in a backpack that hung from his shoulders, straps across his chest. He unstrapped it and dropped it down in the sand beside me, then collapsed into the extra lounge chair that I'd brought for Penny. She was still sleeping. Probably. You made good time. I saluted him with my margarita. It had an umbrella. Penny would like little umbrellas. He ran a hand through his hair, mussing it. He was wearing swim shorts. Was it a glamour, or had he actually tucked that beneath his metal suit? It was a long flight. I flew towards where the jet had last been spotted, then caught a ride until we got here. He nodded up at the distant speck of a jet. Saves fuel not to have to land. He nodded and took the drink I'd made for Penny. I'll need to borrow your clothes. Feel free. He reached over and almost touched the jacket that hung from the back of my chair, looking like a towel. I swiped him with a clawed hand and he retracted it, shaking his head. Claws. You have authentic claws growing out of the end of your arms. She probably thinks it's adorable. So this is the famously mysterious Huntsman Island. It's not as nice as my private island. I smacked his chest. If you like golf courses, horse tracks, and casinos. He smirked, eyes bright and wild. Which you do. After I marry Penny, I'll take her there. Dress her in something velvet or silk. Have her blow on my dice for me. I laughed. She'd end up talking your horses into a revolution, a Tea Party revolution involving top hats. Something disastrous would happen, completely destroying every possibility of breaking, even much less making a profit. She'd single-handedly demolish every deal done in that swanky spot. He shrugged. That's what I want. Sometimes it's terrifying how much she fulfills all of my highest ideals. Ideals? I'm speechless. Coming from an arms dealer, it's quite priceless. I can't imagine her liking your company logo in her hip. I personally find it brilliantly ironic. You really made excellent time. You must have stepped through side somewhere in the middle of the ocean, flew to the jet using your fancy magic mech suit, had the jet turn around in the air, then come back here. Did you notice anything else? Anything unusual? He frowned at his drink. This tastes like fruit. You made me a fruity drink? No, nothing unusual. But the jet turning around and falling off sensors, then back on them, might cause some alarms if someone's paying attention. Everyone at school should still think that Penny's locked in her room. I nodded, but I stared at the sky. Zach, how did you get here so fast? Penny's voice was anxious, partly out of breath as she came over, sitting on the end of Zach's sun chair like she really was his girlfriend. Pitch was, and she was Pitch. She didn't look like Pitch in the enormous hot pink sun hat or bright yellow bikini, far more revealing than her night clothing had been. She hid her eyes beneath big sunglasses that I had a vague recollection of my aunt wearing. Zach nodded at the mech suit piled up in the sand like it wasn't a multi-million-dollar piece of equipment. Nice hat. I didn't know they came that big. Here, have my drink. It's too girly. She took the drink and hesitantly put her mouth on the straw where his lips had been. I kicked Zack, startling Penny and spilling the drink. I grabbed the drink away from her. "What are you doing?" she asked, head cocked. I blinked at her, not looking at the miles of legs beneath her incredibly small bikini. "Zack stole your chair. Sit in mine. I'll get another one." I turned and switched straws so she'd have mine when I handed the drink back to her, once she'd sat slowly and hesitantly onto my chair. I snapped my fingers and another chair popped next to hers with a slightly green crackle. She inhaled and settled back down where my body had been a few seconds before. Could she feel the warmth from me? Probably not. It was too hot. I walked over to the chair and shifted, trying to adjust it, so it was at the right angle, but nothing was quite right. Instead, I stood up and headed for the water, leaving Penny and Zack alone together. Not entirely alone. I stopped up to my waist so I could still hear their voices if I used a bit of magic. "Crazy mage, how did you like my jet? What is the same logo you engraved into my hip? Do you consider me personal property of your family, or something?" I smiled and cupped a handful of water while a fish nibbled my calf. Zack laughed, slightly wild-sounding. "Would that bother you? It shouldn't. Stoneborough only owns the best destructive equipment in the world. I think it's being classified as equipment that I object to. Also, it's an ugly logo. Couldn't it be something more decorative and fancy? We've had this conversation before. You wish I'd stamped it across your forehead. Where did you get that bikini?" Penny sighed. This one had the most coverage. It's almost like they sell swimming suits with the express purpose of using as little fabric as possible. She must not like to spend money on them. Zack laughed. "On the contrary, you have to be rich to have such a small bikini. How do you like Drake's dad?" She paused. "He's very nice. He kept referring to me as your girlfriend." "Nice? What's nice about him?" There was a tinge of jealous possessiveness in Zack's voice. Penny wouldn't notice it. She never noticed anything. I turned around so I could see her in the chair, her pale pink skin spread beneath the sun like a piece of turkey about to get smoked. I cupped my mouth. "Penny, did you put on sunscreen?" She'd taken off the sunglasses, so I got to see her big eyes before she looked away from me. "He has a nice mustache, and he gave me a nice lunch. He checked it for poison when I asked him and didn't act like it was weird." "It was weird. Are you wearing sunscreen? I can put some on you if you'd like." Zack put sunscreen on Penny. "Never." She shook her head and shot me a frown like she could hear my thoughts even though I was waist deep in the water. "I put on sunscreen in the room. A lot of it. Why are they here? It doesn't seem like a business meeting. Does that come later?" Zack gave me a malicious smile. "You haven't heard the whole gory story. Drake's mother killed herself. They have to renew the protection wards on huntsmen every year here, where she broke them." Penny didn't say anything for a long time. I turned to stare out at the ocean. The distant line of sky and sea kissing should be my focus instead of the witch behind me, her long legs kissed by the sun. Enough. I dove in, letting the cold green world swallow my thoughts. I swam until I couldn't hold my breath and came up gasping 20 feet from shore. I dove back down swimming hard away from my father, Penny, everything else. I swam, only breaking the surface to breathe until the world grew dark.
Blooming Black, Chapter 34. Drake in swim shorts. I could have spent the rest of my life happily lazing in the sun, watching the most beautiful mage in the world play in the water, sun shining on his red hair like fire, volcano, something alive and burning, like my heart burned when he looked at me. Why did he look at me like that if he didn't care? I glanced at Zack, who was much tanner than Drake. Or maybe it was just a glamour. "Hey, Zack, can I really smell a mage's desire? Or was Drake just messing with me?" He choked on his drink. "Are you kidding? There's something wrong with you. You don't just say that to someone. I can't help that you're wearing practically nothing." I blinked at him and sniffed. Freshly baked bread may have been coming from his direction, but it wasn't like the black cherries from earlier. So it's a real thing. I leaned over my knees and looked at the ocean, frowning until I saw Drake's head come up. So, he sort of likes me. He laughed. He wouldn't have gotten that close to marrying you if he didn't. Don't think about Drake. He's boring. I'm much more interesting. I gave him a flat look. So interesting. All right, your magic mech suit is pretty cool, but the way you spend your life drowning in video games is not. He rolled his blue eyes. It's how I think without thinking. A lot of mages do ballet for that. The not thinking, subliminal mind processing, but for me, it's video games. Like I'm on the 13th level fighting the ultimate boss, and suddenly I've figured out how to put together the reverse processor pickup to optimize efficiency. I pushed his shoulder. Bare. Warm. I stared out at the ocean, waiting for a glimpse of Drake's wet head. You just made up those words. Where is he? He pushed my shoulder back, his fingers lingering on my skin. Do you want to go rescue him? I can practically guarantee that you'll end up getting sucked out by a riptide. You'll probably lose your swimsuit. He grinned widely. Definitely he needs you to rescue him. I rolled my eyes and was about to say something, but the light changed. I froze and inhaled deeply, trying to understand the prickling on my skin. Zach, put your suit on, now. He was moving before I finished talking. In 12 seconds, he had the straps secured across his chest, and in another 2 seconds, the metal plates slid over his skin. Are you being paranoid or what? I was up, backing towards the house, with my hands stretched out, like I could feel what was coming. The wind picked up, blowing tendrils of my hair around my face. That smell. Chalky old blood and death. I think it's Creek. And something else. Zach swore a few times and took a position to my left, wearing a lot more than me, holding what looked like a magic wand. I shouldn't have come. I should have let Drake seduce you. I blinked at him. He wasn't going to seduce me. He rolled his eyes before he refocused on the sky above the ocean. The wards are weak this time of year. I suppose if the sorcerer was taking over Drake's family, he'd know about that. But how did he know you'd be here? Wait, the sorcerer messing with Drake wants me? He's the one working with Creek. Penny, I know you aren't really stupid, but sometimes it seems like there isn't any other possibility. Shut up. Seriously, I need to hear them. The sky grew darker and darker as the sun was eclipsed by an enormous zeppelin. What fueled it? The shimmering ship was like the moon, piercing through empty space into our world and bringing night with it. As the ship emerged from the hole, it tore. I shivered. The beach wasn't warm anymore, and the scent of winter and night were echoed by the witches who flew through that hole, swarming like insects through that space. Zach, give me a weapon. Can you be more specific? Is that really a dirigible? Man, I want one of those. He pulled out his phone at the same time he tossed me 3 knives. He threw them specifically so that they'd stab me if I hadn't caught them. This was not the time to play. At least not with him. I held 2 knives in my right hand, one in my left, and ached to be able to fly, to meet the force of darkness sweeping down on us. The 2 of you have so much confidence, Drake's father said as he stepped into line past Zach. His weapon was apparently a wine glass, half filled with something red. Excellent match suit, Stoneborough. It's a pity you don't market those. You could make a killing. Stoneborough makes enough of a killing people. Some things are for personal pleasure. Are you not worried, sir? Drake's dad swirled his wine glass. Call me tracked. They have 3 barriers still left to breach. I think I'll be worried when we have one left. Where's the air? Zach nodded towards the water. Swimming. Tracked, sighed. Needed to cool off his hot head. I can't imagine what the 2 of you were fighting about. Penny. Excellent stance for an airstrike. I can see you've been trained well. Good thinking, keeping to the low ground where you can more easily defend yourself. Most witches would fly to attack. I exchanged glances with Zach. He looked at me, then turned to face Drake's dad. Sir, Tract, you should know that Penny's more vulnerable than most witches. Her protection is something of an issue. She can't fly or fight with magic. Tract raised his eyebrows, but didn't look particularly surprised even if his mustache twitched. So this attack is all for her benefit. What a special girl you must be. He smiled, teeth white and sharp, beneath the auburn bush. His mustache was so interesting. It seemed to convey more emotion than all the rest of his features. That's one word for it, Zach muttered. Tract raised his wine glass and took a sip as he studied the sky. Oh, they've breached the next defense. What is that monstrosity made out of? It must have an incredible field of magic and tech. Looks like someone's been funding those disreputable Darksider tech mages. It makes everything worthwhile. I put so much effort into those protection barriers. It's nice to see that there was some purpose for it. What do you think, Stoneborough? Can you take out that monstrosity? Zach was on his phone still, but his voice was low with whoever was on the other side. I stood there clutching my knives, the sky growing darker and darker and darker on the beach with Drake's dad. It felt so awkward. So, thanks for lunch. I can see where Drake gets his excellent cooking skills. His mustache twitched. Does Drake cook for you? I'd thought he left his culinary talents behind. That's very gratifying to know. What did he make you? Oh, his gingerbread was probably the most notable thing. His eyes changed, growing clearer and more focused as he stared at me. He made you gingerbread. I swallowed, and my grip on the knives got clammy. Sure. He did the gingerbread house and frosted it with little gumdrops on top. I like candy, sweets, macaroons and bonbons and truffles. He scowled at Zach. Stoneborough, is that true? Zach glanced at him and nodded, lowering his phone for a minute. Yes, sir. He was 5 minutes from marrying her. The mustache quivered, but the mage turned away from both of us, glaring at the ocean like he could see Drake beneath the water. When you say vulnerable, are you talking about a shortage of magic? Absence. It's not something she likes to talk about, Zach said, like I wasn't right there with 3 daggers in my hands that were all aimed at his heart. Senior Huntsman nodded. That explains it. He didn't have time to explain what it explained because the horrible, evil, terrifying Stoneborough jet burst through the sky, shot a volley of explosives that hit the silvery Zeppelin in brilliant blue bursts. Penny, do you have a herder? Zach asked me. I looked at him and fingered my hair where I kept a few strands woven with tiny herders. Nothing very impressive. He raised his eyebrows. Tract. Can I lob things through this side of the barrier, or is it double-sided? Defense only. The barrier does not go both ways. Zach held out his hand to me, eyes bright and intense. I hesitated, taking my time unweaving the herder. Zach, if you leave, you won't be able to come back until the barrier falls. You're probably bored and think it would be fun to fly up and blow stuff up. But Drake's dad walked over to Zach and pressed his thumb into his forehead. A flash of blue-green about blinded me before Tract stepped back and sipped some wine. You'll have no problem with the barriers. Have fun. Where were the adults in this situation? I unwove 2 herders, leaving me with a total of 1 for my own defense. Also, it wasn't easy to unweave tiny balls of magical explosives out of your hair while holding 3 knives. I would have, accidentally on purpose, dropped one on Zach's feet if they hadn't been covered in metal plates. After I'd handed them to him, I grabbed his wrist, the metal covering the thick scar. Be careful. We still have to cherry up your ride. He grinned and nodded before he tucked the herders into a slot against his chest that closed with a snick as soon as he removed his hand. His tech suit was awesome. He crouched and leapt, blue sparks surrounding him as he spun, like an arrow loosed into the sky. Zack hit the first barrier. His body sort of waved. Then he hit the second barrier, and then he was in the middle of the fighting. He was almost immediately covered in a swarm of creech. An explosion of pink and green, with the words, "Drake and Penny in lightning shot," sent the Crete back, giving Zack a clear shot at the Zeppelin. He sucked so bad. His throw went completely wide, barely hitting the end of the monstrous flying beast instead of hitting it dead center, or aiming at the base where it probably was manned. Such a waste of a perfectly nice herder. That one was pink and silver with glittering heart shrapnel that smelled like black cherry. It took a while for the cloud to drift close enough for me to smell it. Actually, the scent reached me about the same time the dragon burst into the sky with a delicious roar that sent shivers of delightful horror through me. The dragon was going to eat everything. Drake was wearing green scale armor, green fire sword in his hand as he rode Jello through the crowded sky. "He's beautiful," I breathed. Drake's dad cleared his throat. "I've never seen herders like that. Impressive." "Kick!" I winced because the Drake and Penny in the sky was a little bit noticeable. The words still hung in the air. I should have given him the other one, the one with our initials inside a jaunt heart, because that would be better. The Zeppelin managed to break through the second barrier before the jet's volleys and Drake's dragon's flame brought it down. It didn't crash into the ocean but disappeared when it hit the last barrier, like it was dropped into a body of still water, disappearing from sight. "Where did it go?" I asked Drake's dad. He shrugged and swirled the dregs of his wine. "Dark side. That's 2 barriers they've broken through. It must have been specifically calibrated for this boundary. So this sorcerer who seems to be targeting huntsmen, could you tell me about him?" I inhaled shallowly as a wave of nausea swept through me. I should never have gotten on that jet. They called him a deception sorcerer. He cursed the Creed, so they're working with him. Did he? That's a very powerful curse. Deception sorcerers are so difficult. They can alter your memories so that you forget that they're your enemy. "Are you all right, my dear? You look a bit ill. Maybe you should lie down." He gestured towards the sun chair. I blinked at him, gripping my knives. "I can hold my own. I have a defense spell that takes care of magical attacks. The physical ones I can handle." He smiled, and it looked a bit gentle, a little bit mischievous. So much like Drake, it made my heart ache. In that case, I hope that the barriers fall so that you can have some fun. It's not fair for the boys to steal all the creek. I looked up at the small figures of what seemed like 1,000,000 creech. "It's terrible. So many of them will die because some sorcerer wants a witch." It also made my mouth water, wanting to hear their screams and rip them apart. The sorcerer wants something. The creek wants something. Everyone wants something. Thinking about the long-range consequences of one's desires as it affects others is quite sophisticated. "What school do you attend?" It isn't sophisticated, it's empathy. "Another one of your special skills?" "More like a curse," I said as I crouched. A group of creech were reaching the first barrier, their hands like lightning. They were going to breach the barrier, breaking a hole for their sisters to pass through. They fell down, shooting towards us on the beach, with their black eyes bleeding to the edge of their eyelids, pale skin waxy like the moon. It was still dark. What was beyond the barriers that we couldn't see? My limbs became loose as the first witch attacked. I was smoke and ash, as black as their hearts, as cruel and cold as the infinite expanse of space, like the space between each breath and movement of the creatures. 3 knives, 3 hearts, 3 bodies around me, 3 more. The knives were slick with blood as I moved. a hurricane ripping apart every black-covered figure. The wave of Crete dissolved, and I was left on the beach, littered with creek. A wall of water curled above me, around the beach, hitting the stone cliff and washing down, towards the ocean, but splitting around me. I blinked the black out of my eyes to see Drake's dad. He was holding 2 swords of gleaming light that reflected green in the shadows of the water. Was he doing that with the ocean? Was that supposed to be possible? It didn't seem possible, even with magic. He gestured at me. Not the best battle clothing. I apologize for my sister. She was never prepared for anything. I looked down. Was there any piece of my body not cut and bruised? And this was before the empathy. I wrinkled my nose as I covered the gash on my thigh that was the deepest. How do you make the water do that? He smoothed a hand over the blade of his sword, sending a pulse of bright silver electrical current that cleansed down the edge. I don't. That's my son, or the dragon rather, fire and water. I think it makes him uncomfortable in his skin. Drake dropped through the water, landing on the beach on top of 2 creech. He lost his balance for a second, slipping on their loose clothing before he stalked towards me. His eyes were like his dad said, water and fire, a flame that swirled through his skin and every part of him. For a second, I thought he'd kiss me, but he grabbed my arm and dragged me towards the sun chairs. He held out his hand, and the towel over the back of his chair spun towards us, materializing into a jacket by the time it reached me. The green jacket was woven with energy and love, my kind of magic. He wrapped it around my shoulders and started escorting me towards the steps. Where are we going? Can you really make the water do that? How? What happened to your dragon? Where's Zach? I'm sorry I missed watching you kill the creek. You're so pretty when you're flickering with death. Here. He put his hand against the cliff base and it opened into a tunnel. Ladies first. I stepped into the darkness that was immediately illuminated by green sparks as we walked deeper. I moved fast at a near run, even though it sent more blood down my leg. Is Zach okay? I asked. He picked me up, swinging me until I was against his chest. The green mage armor was like green emeralds that pulsed in time with his heart. They were warm like his skin, not hard but molding to my body. The armies are coming, Stoneburrow jet fighters and huntsman mercenaries. He's having a good time showing off his mage suit. Move your hand. He pushed my blood-slicked fingers off my leg and put his own hand over it, sliding over my skin, muttering his spells until my skin was whole. His hand moved lower, over my calves to my feet, then back up. Over my hip, stomach, chest, and arms. How could he carry me, hold a wave of water over a beach, and heal me at the same time? You must have attention deficit disorder. He raised his eyebrows, and a smile flickered over his beautiful mouth. It was swollen. It would taste like blood and ashes and black cherry if I kissed him. Because I couldn't be entranced with one witch long enough to marry her. Or seduce her, I whispered, and brushed his lips with my fingers. His lips parted, and a sound like a sigh escaped. Was I playing the wrong game? That's what you get for playing more than one at a time. You get confused. I leaned closer until my lips brushed his. He abruptly put me down while my lips buzzed from the contact. Who is seducing whom? If you're feeling better, you can walk, or better yet, run. He yanked me along quickly over the smooth stone floor. Where are we going? Piano. Oh, well, now I understand. I glared at his back. The piano is enchanted. It has more protection spells than the entire world. Nothing will be able to take you from there. We'll hold the battle at the beach while you stay protected. I tugged on my hand. He didn't let go. I can fight. Yes, you can. You can also bleed to death on the beach. That would irritate me. Why? His grip tightened on my wrist. I didn't mind. I wanted his fingers to dig into my skin and bone and never let go. I have no intention of giving him what he wants. It has nothing to do with you smelling like black cherry. He glanced at me over his shoulder, his expression half appalled, half amused. You're smelling me at a time like this? It's like the bucket. We're running for our lives so naturally it's the perfect moment to try your hand at seduction. You're terrible, for the record. You have absolutely no subtlety. What does seduction have to do with subtlety? The sunbathing suit isn't exactly subtle. He groaned and pulled me along faster. No, but mentioning it is a little bit better, Penny Lane. Now say something about how strong and dashing I am. Also how much you love me. I panted a little bit. My stamina was running out. The conflict was too far distant. Any time now the empathy would kick in. I swallowed down panic. I didn't need Drake to see me like that. I pushed, gaining on him and then passing him through a wider part of the passage until I was in front of him. We came out in a small room with a shaft leading up into darkness. He grabbed me around the waist and pulled me against his chest. My heart pounded as I stared into his eyes. I grabbed him around the neck when we started rising into the air. What's happening? Magic, he murmured as his nose accidentally brushed mine. Sparks of awareness went through me along with the ache in my back. Can't it go faster? I whispered back. He narrowed his eyes at me, his hands pressing into my back. And you claim to be stalking me. I glared at him. I claim to not be stalking you. I don't see how I could possibly stalk you while you're holding me in your arms. It just doesn't seem like those are compatible activities. He nodded seriously, his nose brushing mine again. That's a good point. Also, we're almost at the top of this shaft. Are you ready to sit on the piano? I blinked at him, and in a second was blinking in the dim living room of the massive beach house. An enormous couch circled the room, but the pale piano near the wall of windows was definitely the focus of the room. So I'm supposed to hide under it. He pulled me along, holding onto my arm like it was a handle or something. He grabbed a couple of pillows off the couch, tossed them to me, then a pale throw that he tossed onto the piano before he turned and picked me up, swinging me up onto it. Where are you going? I asked, when he finally let me go, turning back the way he'd come. I can't let Zach have all the fun, can I? You'll be safe here. No one will be able to sense you. Whatever you do, don't leave the piano. You're not one of those stupid girls who can't follow basic instructions. I really love that about you. He turned and left, back into the wall that formed seamlessly once he was back in the shaft. I stared at where he had been, still seeing his soft lips. Lips I'd kissed if only for a moment. I closed my eyes and lay my head on one pillow while I hugged another one to my chest. He loved something about me. He'd said it. My heart pounded so hard I thought the world could hear it. And then my legs shattered. Empathy pains. Misery. Multiplied.
Blooming Black, Chapter 35. You took your time, my dad said from the lounge chair. He was enjoying another glass of wine. I stalked past him, looking through the bubble of water to the battle beyond. Jello was enjoying himself immensely, Stoneburrow's fighters in formation like they rarely got to be. Training to fight Cree rarely worked when the Cree never ventured into Dayside. You said that Jasper is no longer with us. Who can we get to stock up the guest quarters with more emergency-appropriate clothing? That sort of thing takes an eye for details. That poor girl fighting in such miserably inadequate garb. I growled but didn't turn to look at him. There was something else up there, something new. Do you smell wither? I cursed and paced up and down the beach, glancing at the bodies, the knife wounds, decapitated Cree that Penny had slain. Pitch, If they'd wanted to kill her, she'd be dead. They wanted her alive. That was one good thing. Another good thing was the way my lips still burned from her kiss. No, that was not a good thing. Kissing Penny was absolutely out of the question. I could block my desire up to a certain point, but when I had so many other things on my mind, I couldn't help but crave her unguardedly. In the tunnel, I should have really kissed her. I could have blamed it on stress. My father stood up, getting in the way of my pacing. She's truly an aberration without magic. I snarled and went around him. I should have stayed on the beach with Penny instead of calling Jello. I shouldn't let my father spend time alone with her. He'd start getting ideas. You love her. She's the perfect woman for you. She adores you. Am I missing something? You've missed everything since my 11th birthday. It takes a while to catch up. You haven't shown up here for the past 2 years. I assumed you'd taken your rightful place in Darkside. I stopped pacing. You think that because I have a dragon, I can't be a Daysider? You don't have a dragon. He has you. His anger and power is inside of you, twisting you into something else. No one can tell how the magic will mix. You haven't spent the last 2 years in Darkside? I rolled my eyes. This was ridiculous. He should at least have checked up on me with Jasper. Of course not. I graduate from Rosewood with honors in the spring. I'm captain of chemists. I'm the prima donna in the ballet corps. You should see me in my tutu. Inspirational. I'm responsible for everything everywhere I go. It's a curse. I didn't get it from you, so it must be something that happened in ancient past, offending an enchantress who had it out for you. You've actually managed to not get expelled from that pretentious factory of pre-made mages. Don't you have anything better to do? I gestured up at the wall of water that flowed around us, keeping the witches at bay. They hated running water. Apparently, I've been completely wasting away. It is difficult to balance the instinctual dark side magic with the learned spellcraft. I've been working with a spellmaster who makes me realize exactly how negligible my knowledge is. He raised his eyebrows. You have weak spellcraft? Ah, because I always told you how essential it was. This spellmaster, is he anyone I know? Do I know who you know? You haven't exactly introduced me to any of your contemporaries. Good. There are a lot of dissolute wretches, everyone. Except Stoneborough. No one is more sober than that mage. His son is quite different. Maybe only on the surface. Are you actually going to let him have her? Why wouldn't he shut up? What was he trying to get me to say, to do? Everything with him was like that, a game. A lesson. She needs a strong Daysider mage. Stoneborough is her best option. If I'd married her, I'd be in his power. But after you defeat him, you can freely marry her. That's how the rules work, isn't it? I ran my hand through my hair as I inhaled deeply. Definitely wyvern. If there were enough of them, they could cause some serious damage to Jello. How do you defeat a deception sorcerer the devil of Darkside and the Prince of Darkness can't pin down? You're the one who has his pinky on your table. I can't hurt him, or it hurts her. So they're tied together. He's her father? Maybe. It seems that whatever else he was going to say was cut off as my chest came alive in agony. I let the wall of water fall and leapt as high as I could. Jello was beneath my feet, winging me towards the house, his body casting an enormous shadow over it. We passed through the barriers around the house without any trouble. I ran along his wing to the deck as he passed, and Zack landed with a thud only a second behind me. I opened the door of the dim room and stared at Penny Lane, writhing and screaming on the piano, but completely alone. I spread my hand out, searching the room for any other presence, my magic sparking green, while Zack did the same before he looked at me and shook his head. She gets really horrible after she channels pitch. It might just be... He winced and grabbed his wrist, then shook his head, and we stalked over to her, weapons ready. She was beautiful, even with a shattered face. How was that even possible? Her knee, Zack said, reaching out, then flinching back when he came in contact with the piano's barriers. Her left knee was the size of a coconut, red oozing, and had 2 white puncture marks, poisoned. I reached out and hesitantly touched the swollen area. Yes. How convenient that I knew absolutely nothing about poison. Get her off there. I need to treat it. He already started removing his mech suit, weapon forgotten. I stared at him. She's safer on the piano. His eyes were bright blue and burning. She's dying. She's terrified of being poisoned. I've been studying up on treatment. Move her, Drake, to your bed. It has the best rejuvenation spells. Move. The crack of his voice moved me. I scooped her into my arms, her body convulsing, bones broken, limbs flopping. I ran, healing her bones as I went. I could do that. I put her gently on my bed and ran my hands over her, the jacket sustaining her, strengthening her. Zack came back with ingredients from the witch cupboard, mixing and mashing while I healed her internal organs. So many injuries, I'd left her whole, hadn't I? What had poisoned her, beaten her so badly? That's the trouble with Pitch, Zack muttered, spreading a white paste onto her forehead. She's amazing and unbelievable, and then everything she inflicts on other people comes back to Penny, only worse. At least she doesn't have empathy for death. Can you finish her leg? I'm going to slice it open, and I want a whole leg so I can gauge the veins more clearly. I nodded and smoothed my trembling hands over her broken, swollen, poisoned leg. What was wrong with me? I was the leader, but I couldn't seem to focus, couldn't make hard decisions like Zack slicing through the skin of her leg, then the vein, blood, and black fluid spilling onto my blanket. It smelled like tar. Get rid of the blood, Drake. I need to see what I'm doing. The blood was everywhere. What was I supposed to do with it? I rolled it up and funneled it into a sculpture that had a convenient opening in the top. It could be a vase. What flowers would you hold in blood? Hold the skin back. I moved back to the bed, put the vase on the floor so the blood could all drain into it. I put it in her veins afterwards, or maybe Zack could do that. I breathed shallowly as I spread the skin apart so the vein was isolated. Zack was inserting something into it, a paste that once it touched her flared magic and crawled through her veins like a worm, eating away the poison. Maybe. How long do I have to do this? He gave me a wild grin. You look a little bit pale. I thought you'd been spending time in medic tents. Blood make you woozy? I closed my eyes and breathed through my mouth so I couldn't smell Penny's blood and the poison. I need a healer, mage. I can't do this. You're doing great. We're almost done. Then we'll have to leave her and hope she can recuperate on her own. Nasty poison. I think she'd be dead if they'd been trying to kill her. I opened my eyes and stared at him. Someone did this just to make her suffer? He tilted his head while he stared at me. Or to make you suffer. The subtle sorcerer has made it personal with you. You're clearly suffering. Don't tell me you've caught some of her empathy. I gritted my teeth. It doesn't bother you to see her hurt? It's not empathy, it's my own pain, my own aching, not hers. To be honest, it does. I've been practicing, though. That helps. Still, I really want to hurt whoever did this. I nodded until the worm descended from her vein in her leg, now the color of blue ink. Can we heal her? Zack nodded and sat down on the floor, gripping his knees with his bloody hands, head between his legs. I stared at him. What are you doing? Not passing out. That took a lot of magic. Also a lot of intestinal fortitude. Finish the job. Drake. So I wasn't the only one completely disturbed by this process. Of course not. He cared about her. She was his Pitch. Pitch. She could handle pain. I drew on the protection spells in the bed, and after what felt like hours, she was back together. She still twitched on the bed, sweaty and cold. I sank down on the floor beside Zack, leaning against the bed and listening to her raspy breathing. Why do we have to wait for it to get out of her system? We're magic. We can do cool stuff. He swung his head towards me. Cool stuff. Your water trick was pretty cool. I've never seen that before. And your dragon, that's not just a little dragon or something, that's a great dragon. The mythological kind that eats worlds. Should you really take it out of Darkside? I shrugged. Why can't you cure her all the way? His eyes went bright and he showed me his teeth. The last time it took her 2 days to recover from being Pitch. That was without poison. Curing her is only part of it. It affects her nervous system and the rest of her when she overloads her energy circuits. She's like a transformer that blew. She has to fix that. It pisses me off so much. Every time I was celebrating Pitch's amazing victory, she was in the back of a van somewhere falling to pieces. Her fans ripped her apart like she rips herself apart. How can I hurt her when she hurts herself so efficiently? I nodded. I get the empathy overcharge thing, but why can't you cure the poison all the way? He shook his head, slow, tired, worn out. I can keep it from killing her, but it's resistant to magic. It will make its way out of her system organically. That's what the worm was for, an organic cleansing method that doesn't register as magic, but it's not going to get everything. I don't hear any more fighting. Did we lose? I stood up suddenly. We'd have to take her far away if we had. Where would be the best place? Darkside, in the Burning Lands. I could protect her from any threat, except that she wouldn't be able to breathe. Also, Sooth could claim her as his aberration to protect. I wasn't going to risk that, even with a dragon. I'll check. You stay with her? Here. I grabbed a t-shirt out of my drawer and some soft pants. I threw them at Zach. Pull them over the bikini. I left him with Penny. He knew about poison because he was taking his role as her protector seriously. He loved Pitch. Even if she was only a little part of Penny, he would take care of all of her. I went down the stairs slowly. I could hear the voices coming from the living room. A woman's low, chilling tone making my arm hairs rise. I hesitated in the wide doorway, leaning on the edge while I took in the sight of my father standing with his wine glass. A look of boredom on his face while a Cree female of startling beauty and long golden locks lectured him. There were 5 dark side mages who held various elixirs in their hands. My father saw me and his face brightened slightly. Ah, here's the mage who has the pinky. Every eye came to me. I waved, feeling slightly underdressed in my swim shorts. I hadn't been thinking about company. This house hadn't had any for over 10 years. You're the green mage? The dragon lord? The Cree asked, coming towards me, pace brisk. I shrugged. Not at the moment. I just came down for a snack. Is the war over? That's too bad. It was a lot of fun. Her eyes went harder, blacker, more terrifying than I had energy to feel. The loss of Cree lives is your responsibility. I laughed before I got my response under control and gave her a smirk instead. Thank you. She hissed and took another step closer to me, raising her hands into the shape of claws like she wanted to scratch out my eyes. She was welcome to try. Your forces, huntsman mercenaries, have been utterly incompetent whether fighting with or against the sorcerer. Unlike the Cree who were cursed as a group by one mage, are you trying to be even less competent and have come here for tips because I assure you, you're doing great on your own. Drake, get a drink. We're having a civil discussion here. They genuinely thought that Sooth was here, pretending to be me. And how did you convince them otherwise? He shrugged. Apparently it's my mustache. Sooth couldn't have grown such a splendid specimen of mustacular perfection in such a short amount of time. I couldn't help but notice the look the Cree female gave my father, one of admiration veering into leering territory. Yes, she liked his mustache. Why are you going against Sooth now? I thought you were firmly under his control. She grimaced, face going freakish and terrifying. She had the pale, papery skin of a true Cree. Had my aunt had skin like that when she'd played Darksider Witch. Leadership has undergone some changes during the last few weeks. Those with a higher immunity to his influence now have come out. And yet, you're here attacking me as though you still worked for Sooth. I don't know. Maybe you think that those who are resistant to his suggestion are in charge, but I think we're all dancing to his tune. She hissed and took another step towards me. Reparations must be made. I stared at her. I don't think it's necessary. You may have attacked an innocent family home, but I think we can forgive it with very little in the way of damages. Stoneborough might disagree. His equipment might have sustained some injury he'd like to address. I suppose he'll send his contract mage. Drake, my dad said, a sigh in his voice, but his eyes were dancing. This was funny to him. This charming Cree leader would like to ally with us against Sooth. It isn't the time for purposeful misunderstandings. She's talking about receiving remuneration for an attack that she didn't research adequately. In Darkside, Huntsman is in negotiations with dozens of sorcerers who we unwittingly attacked instead of fought for. It isn't feasible for us to pay for both wrongful damages as well as those inflicted by others. Sooth is not our responsibility, but our enemy. I hope in the future we can coordinate our attacks to mutual satisfaction. But you will not find any quarter here. Her eyes narrowed. You haven't asked what price we ask. I don't care. Drake, my dad said, coming over with a drink. He handed it to me and shook his head. They want the pinky. They think they can come up with a good protection spell over the entire Cree with an object like that. What are you going to do with it? Fine. I will present the sorcerer's digit to the Cree as an act of goodwill, but one of my men who are under my personal protection will escort the object through the entire process. I'm not interested in giving Sooth back his pinky. I will take everything from him until he has nothing. Not even a memory. The Creek woman nodded. Very well. Is the girl well? I stared at her. What do you mean? Or the girl, the one he wants above all things. Is she well? Penny pale and clammy, veins exposed. It's time for you to leave. She eyed me for a moment before she turned and took the shoulder of one of the Darksiders. They stepped through side, leaving me alone with my father. I walked over to the white couch and slumped down on it. What happened? Poison. He didn't want to kill her. It was a warning or something else. I don't know. I ran a hand through my hair. He could kill her if he wanted, but he didn't want to. She was precious to him. The most valuable witch in any world, an aberration without magic. I would give anything if she were just another witch that I could.
Blooming Black, Chapter 36. I woke up in heaven. Drake's chest was beneath my cheek, his heart pounding steadily. I slid my hand up his bare stomach up over his chest to rest beneath his chin. The light came in dimly through the pale gauze curtains, along with a distant rush of waves. I love you, I mumbled before turning my lips to his skin. Thanks, Penny. Tell Pitch I love her too. I sat upright and stared at Zack, who lay on the big pale bed with his arms behind his head. He wasn't wearing anything other than swim trunks. The room spun around while I tried to not fall over. Macaroons and lollipops. Can you put on a shirt or something? I had on the jacket. A t-shirt and a pair of soft black pants. That's why I thought it was Drake, the jacket. It bore his scent and the feel of him. I gripped the pale duvet in my hands and tried to adjust to the harsh reality of waking up to Zachary Stoneborough. I can, but I don't want to. Mostly because Penny Lane blankets are too hot. All that hair. I never thought that you'd wake up. I glared at him. Did I ask you to be my pillow? He grinned again. Actually, you did. Don't leave me alone, you said. Hold me tight, you said. Never let me go. Oh, yeah. It's been a good time if you like that sort of thing. I don't. But someone had to keep you from going into shock. And Drake had other essential things to do. He's right. He really needs a tan more than me. I already look pretty amazing. I blinked at him. Shock? He brushed my cheek with his fingers, then pressed his hand against my forehead. The fever is mostly gone. Still, you're a little bit clammy. You must feel terrible. I hadn't until he mentioned it. I sank back down on the bed, this time on a pillow beside his head. Somehow it felt even more uncomfortable to stare at Zach's face than to have my cheek against his heart. I closed my eyes. I got sick, sunstroke? I guess that's a thing. What do you remember, Penny Lane? Take your time. I'm actually quite comfortable now that you aren't clinging to me like a limpet on a rock. What's a limpet? Did you make that up? I remember sleeping in Drake's car and then sneaking into the jet and getting stuck there. I remember throwing up a lot. Sorry. I remember throwing up a lot. Sorry. You probably had to clean your jet. He wiggled his eyebrows. Luckily, we hire people for that sort of thing. I would have done a better job. I'm an excellent custodian. That's something you should keep in mind. You still need a husband, right? I blinked at him. Are you applying for the position? His lips twitched. What are the benefits? Will you drool on me every night or only every time you get poisoned? I gasped and gripped the blanket tighter. Poisoned? Who poisoned me? Was it Drake's dad? I shouldn't have eaten what he made me even if he tested it. The thing is, we don't know. It's quite a mystery. We were off playing with Krish while you were supposed to be relaxing on a piano. And then the next thing we know, your knee is the size of your head and your veins are turning black. Think. Penny. Do you remember what happened? I closed my eyes and gripped his wrist. The piano. Drake telling me he loved something about me. Then, a face blurry at first formed and a voice along with it. I said in a quiet voice, Scratch and Titch. Scratch was tall with a face pointed in two directions, like his profile was on the front of the left side of his face. Such a strange face. His hands were huge, with fingers that narrowed into needle-like points. I could pick locks beautifully with those fingers. The tall stranger had walked around the piano while I'd clung to a pillow, my bones shattering, skin slicing into ribbons. I was utterly defenseless if not for the piano. He'd taken his time as though the house belonged to him instead of being an intruder. When he'd spoken, his voice was low, gentle, persuasive. Pretty girl. I'm Scratch. I've come to take you home. You want to go home, don't you? I'd swallowed. Not with you. His smile was so strange. Horrific, probably, with teeth angling out in different directions. You are a surprise. He'd come for Pitch, but found me instead. Penny! Zack rubbed my arm, his face concerned as he brought me back into the sunny bedroom. He wanted Pitch, too. Do you remember anything else? I squeezed my eyes closed. I remembered. His name was Scratch. Titch was the witch with spider legs. She's the one who bit me. I got too close to the edge of the piano. What did they want? I could still hear the strange man's voice. See his eyes widen, showing lavender-streaked irises. One eye focused past me. Titch. I believe she's an aberration and without magic. I haven't seen one of those for a long time, but the way she looks at me, questioning as though her automatic response isn't distrust and disgust, that's the first clue. The second is that she hasn't cursed us yet. Look at her. Perfectly vulnerable. We'll be fighting wars over this one. So pretty, too. You're right. That hair, neck, ankles, and such feet. She'll go for a much better price whole than in pieces, though. Don't get careless. Aberrations are so delicate. A skittering had caught my attention. I'd turned my head and looked past the piano on the other side. A smiling old lady head with sweet, crinkly eyes was perched on top of a spider body and legs. She kept smiling even as she moved back and forth, eyes fixed on me. So, Scratch had been looking at her and me at the same time. I'd shuddered and swung back to stare at Scratch. What are you? He'd crouched down until his eyes were on the level with the top of the grand piano, studying me like he was finding his own answers. I'm a scratcher. Not a killer, not a thief. I'm a getter. I'm a plan failer. Your mind is a tangle. So many broken memories tangling up the wenses and the hoses. I won't be able to get you. We won't be able to get you. We won't be paid. His eyebrows lowered before he shrugged bonish. We'll leave a warning. I'll give you a memory. To Titch. Because her feet are so pretty. He nodded and smiled. Those teeth so sharp and jagged, such a mess of a mage. Going in two directions at once. Maybe he wasn't a mage. How did you get in here? There are supposed to be barriers. Barriers can be scratched. Careful, Titch. Aberrations are so delicate. What's an aberration? I'm not delicate. This is what happens after I kill Creek. Do delicate things kill Creek? No magic, pretty girl. No magic, no madness. No madness, no hatred for mages. No hate, just love. Loving and being loved, the most precious magic of all. But there's more to you. So much sizing. How could not having magic be valuable? It makes no. He'd lunged at me, snapping with his terrible teeth, and I jerked back. My knee brushed the boundary of the piano, and Titch was on me. Only a touch of her nice, grandma-looking teeth that felt as sharp as razors, and I'd been bitten. I'd gone limp immediately, the venom putting me into a strangely painless lethargy until I'd remembered. 2 memories he'd given me. 2 because I had such pretty feet. My hands were shaking as I curled up in bed beside Zach and pressed my knees against his chest. "Hold on to me, Zach." He sighed and pulled me closer, wrapping his arms around my back. Hands strong, steady, warm. I wonder how many times we'll have to do this. I peered over my knees at him. "We've done this before?" He shrugged. "Picture? Do you have it?" He reached over for his phone and showed me a picture of a badly drawn, crashed car, a sorcerer coming towards the viewer, toes poking up on the edge of the page. I blinked and remembered. The smell of blood was everywhere, hot in the cold wind. Was it winter? The wind was so cold, howling around me while I cried. For a long time I lay on the ground, drowning in my blood, crying for my mother. When the man had come, I didn't know what to think. He smiled very kindly, his pale eyes twinkling as he held out his hand to me. My mother hit him from the side, her face pale, eyes dark and determined. Anger filled her eyes with a tinge of fear. They fought, but my mother was already broken, wounded from the crash, and every time she hurt him, she screamed as though she were hurting herself. He hit her, cutting through her with suddenly razor-long nails before flinging her to the side for the final time when she didn't get up. I watched him come towards me. Again smiling, hand outstretched, a spray of my mother's blood across his cheek. "It's time to come home, my precious. Don't cry. You are a precious treasure, my crowning jewel. Don't be afraid. Your mother will be with you. We'll all be together again." My mother. I turned to see her, pale arm outstretched, twined with blood that was dark on her skin. He'd hurt my mother. The world grew dark, and a girl spun out of the shadows, no larger than me, but her eyes were darkness, her lips black as her hair. She stood between myself and the sorcerer, one hand held up. "You cannot take her." The sorcerer lunged at her, but she dissolved and reformed inside him, sending bits of him exploding out with a horrible smell. His eyes were suddenly large, the self-congratulatory smirk replaced with uncertainty. His body should have healed quickly, but when he looked down to see the torn flesh, he shook his head and stepped back away from her. "What are you?" "I am the darkness inside. There is no end to the pain. You will cry." Pitch saved me, but he'd cursed me, the words harsh. Darksider before he vanished in a whirl of smoke and snow. Pitch went to my mother, picked her up, and carried her to me. The feel of Pitch's fingers on my face insubstantial and cold, like brushing the surface of water. I remembered that. The sound of my mother's screams as Pitch brought her awake. I remembered that too. And then my mother tracing out a pattern in the snow, mixed with blood, until the world flashed, and there was Revere. He had a book in his hand and looked up slowly, staring at my mother as though she were the only thing in the world. He closed the book with a snap, and with that, I was back in bed with Zach, sobbing like I was still that little girl in the snow, cursed by a sorcerer, protected by Pitch. "Shh. Penny. It's okay. No one's going to curse you here." Zach stroked my hair, his voice only slightly irritated. I shuddered and put my hand on my back at the base of my spine. The curse. Drake always called it a curse, but I couldn't remember being cursed. Couldn't remember drawing the picture. Memories. My memories had been broken. He'd said he'd give me 2 memories. I didn't want to remember because I knew it would hurt. But I had to know. I went over the first memory, the details of the mage, the monster, And then his eyes pale blue. I knew those eyes. My second memory. Pain. My side. Agony filled the world and the mage who smiled at me, my blood dripping from his fingers, fingers that held two small bones, curved like ribs, bones that looked so delicate, so easily broken. My mother. Her screaming, slashing his face with her nails, pulling me against her chest and whirling away with me while she smelled of exhaustion, blood, but a different kind. Birth. The memory was short, but I could still see the monster's eyes, his nose, a nose an awful lot like mine. I sat up on the bed, staring into space for a long time while the pieces fell into place. My father stole my ribs. Not only my ribs, my magic. My mother had taken me away. There were vague memories of stairs and motels, always moving, always packing, and then the accident, the curse. When my father found us and Pitch fought him off, Pitch, the darkness inside him. I had the darkness of a mage so evil, he could rip the ribs out of his newborn baby. That explained so much about my life. Penny, are you okay? I turned to look at Zach, a mage. All mages were evil. I'd really thought that I understood that, but it was starting to register. My own father had mutilated me for my magic. Not just my magic, to create a witch without magic. To create his crowning jewel. Where's Drake? By the pool. I got up and staggered to the door before I straightened, took a few deep breaths. Hey, Penny, I can get him for you if you want. I don't think you're ready to be running around. I shook my head and left the room. It was Drake's. No one else smelled like that fire, water, dragon. I took the stairs carefully, heart pounding harder with every step. The pool was opposite the deck. My room looked out on it. That would make it this direction. I walked unseeing past beautiful things that didn't matter until I got to the glass door. I stepped into the sunshine and for a moment just stood there, staring at Drake where he sat in a chair, eyes closed, phone at his ear. I went towards him, not realizing there was a pool between us until I stepped off the side and dropped like a stone. It was wet, and I couldn't swim.
Blooming Black, Chapter 37. She walked right into the pool. Clearly she was completely recovered if she was ready to go swimming. I dropped my phone and stood, walking to the edge to stare at the girl at the bottom of the pool that I couldn't see except for a mass of hair in a cloud around her. She wasn't swimming. She was kind of kicking, but it only stirred her hair. We'd gone swimming in the caverns. She could swim. She hadn't really swam, not when I hadn't let go of her for a moment. My heart ached while I hesitated. I was letting Zach take her, but he wasn't there, and I wasn't about to let her drown. I could have brought her out of the water, but this would give me an excuse to hold her. I dove in, the water parting for me until I had her. I pushed her hair away from her face and split the water between us, pressing and compressing it until there was a bubble of air between our faces. She gasped, grabbing my neck and hanging on for her life. She blinked water out of her exquisite hazel eyes, droplets of water trembling on her lips. Her hair spread around her, only her face in the bubble of air beneath the water. I should take her up to the surface, but not yet. "Can you swim?" I asked. She shook her head. No, still gripping my neck. "How do you do this? Right? Cool water magic? Are you okay?" I smiled and brushed her cheek with my fingers. "I'm perfectly well. Thank you for asking." Her legs slid over mine. I struggled not to grab her and pull her closer until there was no space between us. There was a war. Were there any casualties? Out of me, Zach and my father, no. Out of the men who fought with us, mercenaries and Zach's pilots, yes. I don't know the numbers. Her forehead creased from worry. "How much did it cost you?" I brushed her cheek again, her skin so soft, so delicate. "Are you trying to talk business?" Penny Lane, always seducing me at the least practical times. My nose touched hers, my face far closer to hers than it should be. But maybe we were running out of oxygen, and that's why I had to conserve space, or Maybe my brain was oxygen deprived, or maybe just penny-addled. How could I not be with her looking at me like that, hanging on to me like she needed me? She bit her bottom lip as she gazed at me so obviously, adoringly, I couldn't help my pounding heart. She shouldn't look at me like that. But we were at the bottom of the pool. No one would see us. She knew that I desired her. That didn't mean anything, not really. Drake. Her voice shook as she held me with her eyes. I have a stupid favor to ask. She slid her hand down my bare arm to my hand. She gripped it tightly, nails burying into my skin. I swallowed as her body slid against mine in the water. I love stupid favors. She was so beautiful, so sweet, so unaware and in need of protection. She looked down at my mouth, staring while my heart pounded and lips tingled. She was going to ask me to kiss her, and I was going to say yes. Her nails dug deeper into the back of my hand. It's just that I don't feel like it's finished, like we're done. I think that I'm waiting for you to love me. I think if I heard you tell me you loved me, even if I know it's a lie, I'll be able to move on, kind of have some closure, you know. You want me to lie to tell you that I love you? I smiled as she looked up at me through her lashes, dark from the water. I wanted to drink the water from her lashes. I lifted her chin up with the hand she didn't have gripped tightly in hers. If you think it would help, you know I have no ties to any kind of morality. I love you. I slid my hand down her neck and pulled her close until her heart was pounding against mine. I love every piece and part of you. I adore you from your inanity to your lollipops. You are my breath, my song, my heart-shaped shrapnel and energy-infused jacket. You are my magic. You gave me a toffet, and I pulled out love as pink and delicate as your toes fresh from the bath. I inhaled deeply as I brushed her cheek with my lips, tasting her, the rush of energy along her skin making my lips buzz. Her ear was so soft against my lips. Is that what you wanted to hear, Penny, or was I not effusive enough? She sighed, gripping my hand painfully. The rest of her body melted against mine. Swear that it's true. Only for a moment, let me pretend. I whispered into her ear, making her shiver. I swear it's true. I love you. She shuddered and then was kissing me, the kind of kissing I couldn't possibly resist. Time was lost in her lips, hair tangled in my fingers, her heart beating wildly against mine. Penny Lane was in my arms, my breath, my life, and nothing would ever be wrong again. That's when Zack sent an electrical pulse through the water. I gasped as the current swept through me and barely managed to summon a protection spell around Penny. What was wrong with him? He could have killed her. I came out of the water with a roar, blue sparks in my eyes and my entire top layer of skin buzzing. Penny still clung to my hand, her eyes unfocused but fixed on me. Her mouth was so beautiful. I would have forgotten about Zack if he didn't grab me by the neck and yank me away from Penny. She held on to me, and I wasn't letting go. No takebacks, Zack hissed. I tried to breathe while my heart galloped in my chest. It took a few seconds before I managed to take her hand where she held mine and pull it off me. I stepped away from her, gave her a half-smile, then turned and tackled Zack. Electrocution isn't a polite thing to do to your host. I slammed my fist into his face, a fist that should be wrapped in Penny's sweet fingers. But no, I had to give her up. For some reason I couldn't even remember. No, I remembered. With every punch, flesh against bone, I remembered. Those pale eyes, pale hands, hands that would never touch Penny again. No sacrifice I made was too great to protect my treasure, even if I had to hide her in someone else's coffer.
Blooming Black, Chapter 38. I stood on the balcony overlooking the ocean, the place Drake's mother had killed herself. Drake had broken Zack like he was trying to beat his way through a brick wall. Zack had taken up residence in Drake's bed to recover. I'd never seen anything so beautiful and terrible as Drake lost in rage. When he'd finished, when the green had faded from his eyes and he straightened to look at me, I'd seen more emotion in his eyes than words could ever say. I didn't need words. I stood in the moonlight while the ocean rushed beneath me and uncurled my fingers. I'd kept my hand closed all day. I'd have to wash off the blood soon. But for a few more minutes, I'd feel the design I'd cut into his hand. The oath he'd sworn. The truth he'd told. Drake Huntsman, the mage who hated all witches, loved me. I couldn't do magic, but I could trick Drake into telling the truth. I smiled as I brought my hand to my chest, feeling his energy, his love. The boy was much better at lying than being honest. I never would have believed him if I hadn't put him under mage oath. He loved me. I had the darkness of the most disgustingly diabolical sorcerer in Darkside. I also had love. If those two things couldn't defeat my father, nothing could.